Section 8 of The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Preston. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2, by Thomas Burgone. Chapter 7, Alchemy, Part 1. What a weird yet strangely pleasing name the term alchemy is. It is simple, yet so infilled and intermixed with the possible verities of exact science and the philosophical speculations on the infinite and the unknown as to elude our mental grasp, as it were, by its own subtle essence, and defy the keenest analysis of our profoundest generalizers in science. And yet, in spite of this self-evident truth, how fascinating the sound of the word becomes to the mystic student's ear, and bow pregnant with awful and mysterious possibilities it becomes to the immortal powers embodied within the complex human organism termed man. Words, if we but knew it, have the same innate magnetic influence, and possess the same power of affinity and antipathy that the human family possesses, as well as all organic and inorganic forms and substances. And how sad to a developed soul to witness the inharmony existing in our midst, caused by the misapplication of names. Most human beings are very conscious of personal or human magnetism and its effects, but they stop right there and do not dream of the subtle, silent influences emanating from a name, a word, and the power existing in words when properly used. The human mind is so absorbed in nature's manifestations, which are the only husk, that they fail to see the true, hidden meaning and realities concealed beneath the material shell. We will first notice the meaning of the words which constitute our subject, viz., alchemy, then give a brief review of its physical correspondence, chemistry, and its true relation to its spiritual counterpart, alchemy. Al and chemi are Arabic Egyptian words, which have much more in them than appears upon the surface, and possess a far different meaning from the one which the terms usually convey to the average mind. Terms and the ideas we associate with them vary according to the age in which we live. So with those from which the word alchemy is derived. Let us penetrate beneath the mere verbal husk with which linguistic usage and convenience have clothed them, and which, in the course of ages, has become nothing but the dross of decomposed verbiage, and see if we can excavate the living germ that has become buried within. If we can do so, we shall, at the commencement of our study, have attained unto a realization of the ancient meaning and real significance of the terms employed, and this will be no small gain, and will form no unimportant part of the equipment in our present research. The Arabians, who derived the whole of their occult arcana from the Egyptians, are the most likely to render us the most truthful and direct significance of the word, and so we find them thus: al meaning the, and chemia, which means the hidden or secret, ergo, the occult, from which are derived our modern term alchemy, more properly alchemia. This is very different from the popular conception today, which supposes that the world relates to the art of artificial making gold by some chemical process, and viewing it only as some sort of magical chemistry, forgetting that the science of chemistry correction. The Arabians, who derive the whole of their occult arcana from the Egyptians, are the most likely to render us the most truthful and direct significance of the word, and so we find them thus: al meaning the, and chemia, which means the hidden or secret, ergo, the occult, from which are derived our modern term alchemy, more properly alchemia. This is very different from the popular conception today, which supposes that the word relates to the art of artificially making gold by some chemical process, and viewing it only as some sort of magical chemistry, forgetting that the science of chemistry itself is also derived from the Kimia of Arabian mystics, and was considered as one and the same thing by every writer of the Middle Ages. At this time the physical man was not so dense and grasping for husks, hence the soul and spiritual part had greater control, and could impart the real, the alchemical side of nature to him. Hence the law of correspondences was understood, and guided the educated in their considerations, researches, and conclusions. Do you ask why, if they were so enlightened, they availed their knowledge from the world at large? The power of mind over matter was as potent in those days as now, and the masses were as correspondingly corrupt as they are today. Therefore, to put this knowledge into the hands of the multitude would have been generally disastrous. So they wrote it in mystical language, knowing that all educated students in nature's law at that time would understand. Yet they little dreamed how much their language would be misunderstood in the centuries to follow by those who looked to their ancient ancestry for aid on subjects that have become, at the present day, so lost in mystery. Having ascertained beyond question that alchemy was, and consequently is, the secret science of occultism, not the philosophy, mind you, but the science, let us proceed, for we shall find that these two aspects may often differ, or appear to differ, widely from each other, though they can never do so in reality, for the latter produces and establishes the facts, while the former occupies itself in their tabulation and deductions. The science constitutes the foundation, and the philosophy, the metaphysical speculations which rest thereon. If these important distinctions are borne in mind, all the apparent confusion, contradiction, and other intellectual debris will either disappear or resolve themselves into their own proper groups, so that we may easily classify them. It is at this very point that so many students go astray amid the labyrinths of science and philosophy. They unconsciously so mix and intermingle the two terms that 9/10 of the students present only one side of the question, philosophy, which soon runs into theory, if not supported by the science which they have lost in their volumes of philosophy. You may say, one subject at a time. Yes, this may be true if its twin brother is not absorbed and forgotten. In this chapter we shall deal especially with organic alchemy. Organic alchemy deals exclusively with living organic things, and in this connection differs from the alchemy of inorganic matter. These two aspects may, in this one respect, be compared to organic and inorganic chemistry, to which originally they belonged, as astrology did to astronomy. Alchemy and astrology, twin sisters, were the parents of the modern offspring, known in chemistry and astronomy as exact sciences. These latter, however, deal with shadows and phenomenal illusions, while the former concern the living realities which produce them. Therefore, there can be no new thing under the sun, saith Solomon. First, let us deal with the most lovely form of our art, that which pertains to the floral and vegetable kingdoms. Every flower or blade of grass, every tree of the forest, and stagnant weed of the swamp, is the outcome of, and ever surrounded by, its corresponding degree of spiritual life. There is not a single atom but what is the external expression of some separate living force within the spaces of eighth, acting in unison with the dominant power corresponding with the type of life. If science could only behold this wonderful laboratory within the vital storehouse of nature, she would no longer vainly seek for the origin of life, nor wonder what may have become of the missing link in scientific evolution, because she would quickly realize that biogenesis is the one grand truth of both animate and inanimate nature, the central living source of which is God. Science would also further realize that this biune life is ever in motion throughout the manifested universe, circulating around the foci of creative activities, which we term suns, stars, and planets awaiting the conditions which are ever present for material incarnation, and under all possible combinations of circumstances and conditions, conceivable and inconceivable, adapting itself to continuous phenomenal expression. Links, so called, in this mighty chain of evolution may appear to be missing here and there, and, for that matter, whole types may seem to be wanting, but this is only because of our imperfect perception, and, in any case, can make no real difference with the facts, because, if such be a reality, if there be what we may term missing links in the schemes of evolution, it only shows that spirit, although associated with, is ever independent of matter. But matter, what is to become of it? Is it independent of spirit? The kindness of the Divine Spirit heeds not the unconscious mind of matter and its boasted independence, and works silently on, and at last accomplishes its mission, the evolution of matter, the uplifting of the soul of man as well as the universe. The blindness of man is dense, and the saddest part to admit is that they will so stubbornly remain so. If, for one instant, the penetrating eye of the soul could shine forth through the physical orbs of vision, and imprint the scenes beheld behind the veil upon the tablets of the brain of the physical organism, a fire would be kindled that could never be quenched by the fascinating allurements of the material, perishable things of matter. That development of the real atom of biune life can and does go forward, irrespective of the gradation of physical types, needs no convincing proof other than visible nature. Man is not the outcome of physical evolution and produced by a series of blind laws that lead him upward from protozoa to man, as a child climbs upstairs, advancing regularly, one step at a time. This later conception, we know, is the theory of exact science, but not of alchemy, not of the science of occultism. Man, according to Wallace, Darwin, Huxley, and Tyndall, is what progressive stages of physical evolution have made him. But the very reverse is true. The fauna and flora of past geological periods are what the human soul has produced, by virtue of its gradual advancement to higher states and conditions of life, so that, so far from man being the outcome of the planet's development, such material progress is the outgrowth of man's advancement, proving again that matter is not independent of spirit, neither can spirit be independent of matter for its expressions. They so interblend that the dividing line cannot be detected by the untrained eye of the exact scientist, but that time is not far distant when the scientists will prepare and evolve their interior being to take up the spiritual thread exactly where the visible thread ends, and carry forth the work as far as the mortal mind of man can penetrate, while embodied in the physical form. God hasten this day is my prayer, for then man will become more spiritual and aspiring for advancement and knowledge, thus setting up vibrations that will create higher and loftier conditions for the physical man. Aye, then they will know that even the birth of the world itself owes its primal genesis to the desire of the human atom for earthly embodiment. Here is where exact science, or the counterpart of alchemy, becomes both profitable and helpful. Says Paracelsus, the true use of chemistry is not to make gold, but to prepare medicines. He admits 4 elements: the star, the root, the element, and the sperm. These elements were composed of the 3 principles: sideric salt, sulfur, and mercury. Mercury, or spirit sulfur, or oil and salt, and the passive principles, water and earth. Herein we see the harmony of the 2 words, alchemy and chemistry. One is but the continuation of the other, and they blend so into each other that they are not complete apart. The chemist, in his analysis of the various component parts of any form of matter, knows also the proportional combinations, and thus, by the law of correspondence, could, by the same use of the spiritual laws of alchemy, analyze and combine the same elements from the atmosphere to produce the corresponding expression of crystallized form. By the same laws are affinities and antipathies discovered and applied in every department of Nature's wonderful laboratory. Chemistry is the physical expression of alchemy, and any true knowledge of chemistry is, not the knowing of the names of the extracts and essences and the plants themselves, and that certain combinations produce certain results obtained from blind experiments, yet prompted by the Divine Spirit within, but knowledge born from knowing the why and wherefore of such effects. What is called the oil of olives is not a single, simple substance, but it is more or less combined with other essential elements, and will fuse and coalesce with other oils and essences of similar nature. The true chemist will not confine his researches for knowledge to the mere examination, analysis, and experiments in organic life, but will inform himself equally in physical astrology, and learn the nature, attributes, and manifested influence of the planets that constitute our universe, and under which every form of organic matter is subject and especially controlled by. Then, by learning the influence of the planets upon the human family, and that special planetary vibration that influences the individual, he can intelligently and unerringly administer medicines to remove disease in man. A familiarity with the mere chemical relations of the planet to man makes still more apparent the mutual affinity of both to the soil, from which they appear to spring, and to which they ultimately return. So much so that we have become conscious that the food we eat is valuable, or otherwise as a life sustainer, in proportion to the amount of life it contains. We are so complex in our organization that we require a great variety of the different elements to sustain all the active functions and powers within us. Man, being a microcosm, or a miniature universe, must sustain that universe by taking into the system the various elements which combine to make up the infinite universe of God. Animal flesh is necessary to certain organized forms, both animal and man. When I say necessary, I do not mean an acquired taste and habit of consuming just so much flesh a day, but a constitution which would not be complete in its requirements without animal flesh. I am thankful such do not constitute the masses. Science would say, you only require certain combinations of oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and carbon to sustain all the activities of the physical body. Apparently, this is true. Upon the surface, it is. But in reality, it is not, because if it were really true, there could be no famines. Science could make bread out of stones, as was suggested at the temptation of Christ in the wilderness. And yet, no one knows better than the academies of science themselves that their learned professors would quickly starve to death if they were compelled to produce their food from the chemical properties of the rocks. They can make a grain of wheat chemically perfect, but they cannot make the invisible germ by which it will grow, become fruitful, and reproduce itself. They can reproduce from the stones in the street the same chemical equivalents that go to compose gluten, albumin, and starch, their trinity which must always be present to sustain life, but they cannot, by any known process, make such chemical equivalents of these substances do the same thing. Now, if not, why not? Science cannot answer this. A very mysterious shake of the head and profound silence is the only answer. Ask science how the plant grows, what causes the atoms of matter to build up root, stem, leaf, bud, and flower, true to the parent species from which the germinal atom came. What is there behind the plant that stamps it with such striking individuality? And why, from the same soil, the deadly aconite and nutritious vegetables can grow, each producing qualities in harmony with its own nature, so widely different in their effects upon the human organism, yet so completely identical as regards the source from which they appear to spring? There must be a something to account for this, and this something, ancient alchemy alone can scientifically reveal and expound, and this knowledge lies just beyond that line which calls a halt to material scientists and says, "You can go no farther. This is beyond your purview." The end of the material thread has been reached, and unless you can connect it with the thread of the next plane, your researches must stop. Before entering upon and answering these vital questions, we must digress a little and make ourselves perfectly familiar with the ideas and revelations of advanced physical science upon the subject. and for this purpose no more trustworthy guide can be consulted than the new edition of The Chemistry of Common Life, by the late James F.W. Johnson, M.A., England, and revised by Arthur Herbert Church, M.A. In Chapter 4, on page 56 of this work, upon the anatomy of plant life, we read: "How interesting it is to reflect on the minuteness of the organs by which the largest plants are fed and sustained. Microscopic apertures in the leaf suck in gaseous food from the air. The surface of microscopic hairs suck a liquid food from the soil. We are accustomed to admire with natural and just astonishment how huge rocky reefs, hundreds of miles in length, can be built up by the conjoined labors of myriads of minute zoophytes laboring together on the surface of a coral rock. But it is not less wonderful that, by the ceaseless working of similar microscopic agencies in leaf and root, the substance of vast forests should be built up and made to grow before our eyes. It is more wonderful, in fact, for whereas, in the one case, the chief result is that dead matter extracted from the sea is transformed into a dead rock, in the other, the lifeless matter of the earth and air are converted by these minute plant builders into living forms, lifting their heads aloft to the sky, waving with every wind that blows, and beautifying whole continents with the varying verdure of their ever-changing leaves." Further on in the same chapter, on pages 62 through 3, the same eloquent writer continues: "But the special chemical changes that go on within the plant, could we follow them, would appear not less wonderful than the rapid production of entire microscopic vegetables from the raw food contained in the juice of the grape. It is as yet altogether incomprehensible, even to the most refined physiological chemistry, how, from the same food taken in from the air, and from generally similar food drawn up from the soil, different plants and different parts of plants should be able to extract or produce substances so very different from each other in composition. But the special chemical changes that go on within the plant, could we follow them, would appear not less wonderful than the rapid production of entire microscopic vegetables from the raw food contained in the juice of the grape. It is as yet altogether incomprehensible, even to the most refined physiological chemistry, how, from the same food taken in from the air, and from generally similar food drawn up from the soil, different plants and different parts of plants should be able to extract or produce substances so very different from each other in composition and in all of their properties. From the seed vessels of one, the poppy, we collect a juice which dries up into our commercial opium from the bark of another, cinchona. We extract the quinine with which we assuage the raging fever from the leaves of others, like those of hemlock and tobacco. We distill deadly poisons, often of rare value for the correction. We distill deadly poisons, often of rare value for their medicinal uses. The flowers and leaves of some yield volatile oils, which we delight in for their odors and the aromatic qualities. The seeds of others give fixed oils, which are prized for the table or use in the arts. These and 1,000 other similar facts tell us how wonderfully varied are the changes which the same original forms of matter undergo in the interior of living plants. Indeed, whether we regard the vegetable as a whole, or examine its minutest part, we find equal evidence of the same diversity of changes and of the same production, in comparatively minute quantities, of very different, yet often characteristic forms of matter. From the whole of the foregoing, we observe the exact position to be the one we have previously stated. If such wondrous things can be revealed to us through the physical science of chemistry, what think you must be hidden from our physical sight and knowledge by the veil which hangs between matter and spirit? Think you not it is worth the effort to penetrate beyond that point where the atom disappears from the view of the scientist? If plants produce such wonderful phenomena in their life and influence, what must the divine organism of man have concealed within his microscopic universe to study and comprehend? Plant life is merely the alphabet of the complex, intricate, and multitudinous processes going on in the human body. And as the mechanical microscope of physical science cannot reveal the why and the wherefore, let us, for a brief moment, disclose some of the wonders that declare their existence when subjected to the penetrating alchemical lens of the inward spirit. The first thing that intrudes itself upon our notice, by virtue of its primary importance, is the grand fact of biogenesis, life emanating from life. We perceive every external form to be the physical symbol of a corresponding degree of spiritual life, that each complete plant represents a complete cycle, state, or degree of interior existence, that it is made up and consists of countless millions of separate atoms of life, that these atoms of spiritual activity are the real instigators of the life and motion of corresponding material atoms, that they ever obey the divine impulse of co-operative unity in their chemical as well as their spiritual affinity. Consequently, everything in the form of material substance must be, and is, but the means for the phenomenal expression of incarnating spirit, the organism of man, a tree, a plant, or an animal, being no exception to this divine, omnipresent law of creative life. To the true alchemist, there can be no mystery surrounding the wonderful phenomena mentioned in the work we have quoted. In plants extracting from the same rock, soil, and air, qualities so manifestly different, deadly poisons, healing balsams, and pleasant aromas, or the reverse, from the same identical plant foods. Nothing is more wonderful or mysterious than the same alchemical processes which are hourly being enacted within our own bodies. From the same breath of air and the same crust of bread do we concoct the blood, the bile, the gastric juice, and various other secretions, and distill the finer nervous fluids that go to build up and sustain the whole of our mental and dynamic machinery. It is the same ancient story of the atoms, each part and each function endowing the same inorganic chemicals with their own spiritual, magnetic, and physical life qualities, by what appears to the uninitiated observer a miraculous transmutation of matter, but which is, in reality, the evolution of organic form from inorganic materials in obedience to the divine law of spiritual progression. Who could stop with exact science? For when we come to consider the apparent mysteries of life and growth by the aid of this alchemical light, the shadow flee and all the illusions of nature's phenomenal kaleidoscope vanish before the revelation of the underlying spiritual realities. We know that the plant, being the physical expression upon the material plane of a more interior life, endows its outward atoms with their peculiar qualities. These qualities are not drawn directly from the soil only becoming the medium for their complete or incomplete expression, as the case may be, i.e., supplying the necessary inorganic atoms. Hence, the deadly qualities of aconite and the generous, life-sustaining qualities of the nutritious vegetable being spiritual life endowments, conveyed to the material substance, abstracted from the soil, and withdrawn from the atmosphere, are no mystery, their effect upon the human organism being exactly that, which is produced by their spiritual affinity or antipathy, as the case may be. And this also shows and explains why purely inorganic chemical atoms, though they be exactly the same as the organic substances from a strictly scientific standpoint, yet fail to support life, because such chemical equivalents lack the organic spirituality of the interior life, which alone gives them the power and function to support the same. They fail to fulfill the requirements of the alchemical law of life for the support of life, in other words, biogenesis. And too, this inorganic life may be parted from the plant or vegetable, if it be too long severed from the medium which transmits the spiritual life from the inorganic world to that of organic matter. Vegetables, fresh from the ground or parent stem, retain this life if at once prepared for food, if not overcooked, which is so often ignorantly done. This is the secret of sustenance from foods. Nature's perfected fruits and vegetables are overflowing with the life-giving essences, and if eaten direct from the tree or parent stem, that life is not lost, but transmitted to our organisms, and replenishes the wasting system with a living life. Much less of such food is required to completely satisfy and nourish the body than if the life had partly departed or been destroyed. Briefly stated, then, everything within organic nature is the expressional symbolic manifestation of spirit. Every form being a congregation of innumerable atoms of life, revealing their presence in material states, each organic form, or rather, organism, evolving under the central control of some dominating deific atom or soul, which by virtue of past incarnations and labors in its cycle of evolution from the mineral up to man, has achieved the royal prerogative to rule within its own state. Man being the highest representative form, man being the highest representative form, the grand finale in the earthly drama, sums up and contains within himself everything below, and the germs of everything beyond this state. He is truly a microcosm, and represents in miniature the grand cosmic man's of the heavens. Every living force beneath him corresponds to some state, part, or function, which he has graduated through and conquered, and which, in him, has now become embodied as a part of his universal kingdom. Consequently, all things are directly related to him in the grand universal unity of spiritual life. This cannot be realized and comprehended by the physical man, nor conveyed to his outer senses by the physical sciences. He must bring into active use the inner man, the real being, which inhabits and controls the outer organism, and through its instrumentality understand the interior source and workings behind the phenomena of manifested being. So we see that exact science cannot take us far, yet it is a mighty factor in the evolution of the microcosm man, and in consciously relating him to the infinite macrocosm, God, Spirit, all. End of section 8. Recording by Jill Preston. Section 9 of The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Preston. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2, by Thomas Burgoni. Chapter 8. Alchemy, Part 2. Paracelsus, the most celebrated of the alchemists of the Middle Ages, thus mystically speaks of his art: "If I have manna in my constitution, I can attract manna from heaven." Melissa is not only in the garden, but also in the air and in heaven. Saturn is not only in the sky, but also deep in the ocean and earth. What is Venus but the Artemisia that grows in your garden? And what is iron but the planet Mars? That is to say, Venus and Artemisia are both products of the same essence, while Mars and iron are manifestations of the same cause. What is the human body but a constellation of the same powers that form the stars in the sky? He who knows Mars knows the qualities of iron, and he who knows what iron is knows the attributes of Mars. What would become of your heart if there were no sun in the universe? What would be the use of your vasa spermatica if there were no Venus? To grasp the invisible elements, to attract them by their material correspondences, to control, purify, and transmute them by their ever-moving powers of the living spirit. This is true alchemy. Thus, in a very few simple words, we find this master of the art revealing the whole arcana of that mysterious science, which has for its chief object and goal the discovery of the philosopher's stone, which confers upon its fortunate possessor the blessings of immortal youth. Therefore, we cannot possibly do better in the commencement of our present study than to minutely examine each particular sentence and endeavor to discover his true meaning, which, like all mystical writing, is so apparent, yet cunningly concealed as to excite the student's admiration. If I have manna in my constitution, I can attract manna from heaven. The manna here spoken of does not specify any particular thing, but is of universal application, and is simply used as an unknown quantity, like XYZ in mathematics. But, ever since the days of Paracelsus, half-initiated mystics and bookworm occultists have endeavored to discover what this manna really was. Some, the more spiritual, were of the opinion that it was spiritual power or purity of spirit. Others imagined it to mean special magnetic qualifications, similar in nature to the so-called gifts of modern spiritualistic media. The concealment of the truth is unique and consists in its very simplicity, and, when correctly expounded, should read: I am the microcosm, and all the visible and invisible universe dwells within me, so that whatsoever power I have in my constitution, I can attract its correspondence from heaven. Paracelsus must have smiled to himself when he wrote, "If I have manna," etc., because his whole writings strive to prove the man. Correction. Paracelsus must have smiled to himself when he wrote, "If I have manna," etc., because his whole writings strive to prove man the miniature of deity. Further along, he explains himself by pointing out the real law of correspondence. Thus, Melissa is not only in the garden, but also in the air and in heaven. Saturn is not only in the sky, but also deep in the ocean and earth. The illustrations are beautiful. The life of the plant, the animal floralis, pervades the atmosphere and the interior states of spiritual life, where it becomes in the highest degree beautiful and beneficial to the soul. A reference upon this point to "The Light of Egypt," Volume 1, may not be considered out of place. Upon page 74 it is written: "The flower that blooms in beauty, breathing forth to the air its fragrance, which is at once grateful to the senses and stimulating to the nerves, is a perfect specimen of nature's faultless mediumship." The flower is a medium for the transmission to the human body of those finer essences and of their spiritual portion to the soul, for the aroma of the flower is spiritualized to such a degree as to act upon the life currents of the system, imparting to the spiritual body a nutriment of the finest quality. Thus, here is where the knowledge of the alchemical attributes of plants, as applicable to man, can be most beneficially utilized. Plants and flowers, whose attributes and aromas harmonize with the complex organism of man, should be selected for the house and garden, for they are mediums to transmit the finer essences and aromas to the spiritual constitution of man, the plant to the physical, and the aromas and essences of the flowers to the soul. Antipathies in plants and flowers would bring a similar evil influence as the discords of the antagonistic human magnetism. It would not be so apparent, but more subtle, yet nevertheless effective in result. Our attention is next drawn to the planet Saturn, which we are informed is not only shining in his starry sphere of the heavens, but is also buried in the ocean depths and embodied in the stratas of the earth. It is almost needless to add that our author refers to those substances naturally Saturnian in their quality of life and expression, such as lead, clay, and coal among the minerals, and various deadly plants among the flora, the chief of which is the aconite or monkshood, so significant of Saturn and the isolated monkish hermit. After some repetition, in order to impress the truth of correspondences, our author exclaims, "What is the human body but a constellation of the same powers that form the stars in the sky? Truly, what else? For he who knows Mars knows the qualities of iron, and he who knows what iron is knows the attributes of Mars. Could anything be plainer? We think not." From the foregoing, which a long experience and much critical investigation and research have demonstrated as true, we cannot avoid the conclusion that alchemy, Equally, as well as every other science, religion, or system of philosophy formulated by man, resolves itself, ultimately, in all its final conclusions, into the one universal parent of all wisdom. Astrology, the science of the stars, in unison with the science of the soul, was, and still is, the one sublime center of real learning. It constituted the sacred fountain of living waters, from whose placid depths there rayed forth the divine revelations of man, his whence, where, and whither, and under the careful conservation of a long line of gifted seers, it shone forth to the sons of men as a sacred hermetic light in the astro-Masonic window of Egypt's ancient priesthood. It is not lost to us today. The same book lies open before us that faced our ancient forefathers. It is standing out clear and distinct, waiting to be read by the sons of men. We can learn its language, and from its pages we ourselves can read our relation to God and our fellow men. Shall we not heed the whispering intuitions of the soul, and place ourselves in conscious rapport with the whole? This sublime book of wisdom was written by God Himself to convey to His children the knowledge of His powers, attributes, and relation to all creative life. We cannot see that divine spirit which we call God. No, but as long as the finite form exists as such, we will have the spirit's manifestations to learn from. Never will the book of God be closed to the searching eye of the soul. There will always be presented to his vision lessons to study and practical experiments to perform, to lead the soul into deeper mysteries. Until man fathoms his own universe, he cannot understand God. Know thyself is as applicable today as when the famous, immortal, and mystic utterance was inscribed on the porch of the temple at Delphi. Before this wonderful, divinely elaborated but complex system can be fully realized, it is necessary that the student should comprehend very distinctly the two states of existence, the internal and the external, and become familiar with the laws of correspondences. And it seems strange that of all sciences, that of medicine should have so completely failed to grasp this living truth, since every atom of medicine administered invariably acts upon this alchemical principle. When the human organism has become discordant in some of its parts, it is because the interstellar vibrations have aroused various states within the human kingdom into a condition of rebellion against the supreme will. Man's ignorance favors such seditious movements, and his general habits and code of morals stimulate them to undue activity. The final result is disease, disorganization of the parts and functions, and those medicines corresponding to the same functional degree of life within the grand man cure the disorder, when administered properly and in time, whereas is given to the perfectly healthy organism. The atoms produce similar symptoms to the diseases they alleviate, because it is their mission to either subdue or be subdued. And when disease prevails, the medicinal atoms, acting in unison with the natural parts and functions they affect, conquer or subdue the inharmony, and vice versa, as before stated. In all cases of disease and medicine, it is a simple question of a war between the atoms, and therefore the most potential forces within nature are always at the command of the true alchemist, because he knows both, and when to select his fighting forces, and when to set them in motion for the best results. Hahnemann, the founder of the homeopathic system, has approached the nearest to this alchemical truth, and as a consequence we find it is in actual practice the most natural, scientific, and successful system of medicine, yet given to the world, based as it is upon the well-known law of affinities, similia similibus curantur, like cures like, being a very ancient axiom in the astrological practice of physic. Bulwer Lytton, who had become thoroughly convinced of the great value and importance of uniting ancient alchemy with modern medicine, makes the hero of his immortal story declare, "All that we propose to do is this: to find out the secrets of the human frame, to know why the parts ossify and the blood stagnates, and to apply continual preventives to the effects of time. This is not magic. It is the art of medicine, rightly understood. It is a fact that the molecules of the body are all changed within 12 months, that every cell in the human organism is born and grows to maturity within that space of time. Nature is absolutely impartial. She draws from the atmosphere that she may reproduce a facsimile of everything she finds upon the surface of the body. So, if there be a sore or festering ulcer, the atoms which are thrown off attract similar atoms, so as to reproduce the ulcer or sore, and thus prevent the disease from getting well of itself until it has worn itself out. Further, every vein and canal throughout the entire body, from youth to maturity, is being coated with carbonate of lime, or lime in some form. The coating of the walls of the veins in such a manner prevents the free circulation of the living matter. Then, the real vitality of the food which we eat is simply passed off through the pores, or through the bowels, or through the system, because it is unable to penetrate through the lime. If that prevention which produces old age can be attained, then physical youth will continue. The first step to take is to dissolve the lime in the body. Drink nothing but distilled water in either tea, coffee, or any other form, and drink freely of the sweet juices of the grape and apple. The food that we eat contains lime in a living form, and it is the living lime we need to build up the living bones, for the lime and the magnesia that we take in the water is crystallized dead mineral possessing no responsibility of life, and the lime in our food is quite sufficient for all purposes. For everything we take in excess, nature makes us pay the penalty. The first principle of long living is to keep all channels of the body perfect and free from coatings of lime. The second is that of youthful ideas of the mind. The soul never grows old. The third principle is dynamic breathing, which is storing up the oxygen in sufficient quantities to supply the tissues with sufficient fuel for combustion. These three principles, acting in unison, contain the true basis of physical life and a means of long living. Old age is simply the petrification of the body through lime and the incorporating of erroneous thoughts into the organism. It is the true alchemy of human existence, and the preventives in each and every case must contain the spiritual correspondence to the cause they seek to remedy, and, though the followers of Hanuman base the whole of their procedure of treatment upon their master's fundamental law of similia similibus curantur, yet there may be a few rare cases wherein this undeviating method would not apply with the required effect. In such a case, the alchemist would resort to the well-known law of opposites, and base his treatment upon the dogma of contraria contrarius curantur, so long the pet theory of the allopathic school. They work upon the hypothesis that like attracts like, and if disease exists, those elements must be administered to set up the vibrations that will produce the polar opposite. If the body was racked with pain, those medicines would not be given that would create or increase similar conditions, but their antipathy would be introduced into the system or applied locally to extinguish the foe. So long as mankind remains within the semi-crystallized state of soul development, so as to require the aid of external forces to support the human throne within its earthly temple, mercenary troops will exist to supply these supposed supports. Unquestionably, the astrological law is the true system of medicine, which treats disease by sympathy or by antipathy, according to the nature of the case and the efficacy of the remedies at hand. This method is the only natural one, and has been thoroughly demonstrated by the numerous provings of drugs under Hanuman's law. Happily, the time is not far distant when, The incarnated spirit will be able to use its own slumbering forces, and subdue all suffering and symptoms of disease, in their very first inception by virtue of its purer life, and the dynamic potencies of its own interior, spiritual thought. Already, mental therapeutics is taking an advanced position among liberal, progressive minds, and nothing demonstrates so clearly and forcibly the grand alchemical law of life, growth and decay, as the imponderable, invisible forces which constitute the materia medica, or remedial agents of mental, magnetic, and spiritual healing. Perhaps the most recondite subject connected with the healing art divine is the modus operandi of medicinal action upon the human body. A subject so simple and self-evident to the alchemist remains a profound mystery to the educated physician of the medical college, so much so that we are tempted to ask of them, "Can you explain the modus operandi of drugs?" Dr. William Sharp, one of the most advanced physicians of the homeopathic school, in one of his well-known essays on medicine, says, "In respect to the manner of action of drugs, we are in total darkness, and we are so blind that the darkness is not felt. Knowledge of this kind cannot be attained. It is labor lost and time wasted to go in search of it." True, hypotheses may be easily convinced, so may straws be gathered from the surface of the stream, but what are either of them worth? There is this difference between them: straws may amuse children, and hypotheses are sure to mislead physicians. It is when the occult initiate observes to what helpless conditions the practice of medicine has fallen, that he would, if he could with any possibility of success, implore the angelic guardian of the human race to open the spiritual sight of men, that they might see as he sees the divine relationship and spiritual correspondence of everything in the wide universe to man. Nature's laws move slowly and imperceptibly, yet surely and exact, and the time will certainly come when man will be forced into consciousness of these laws, whether he will or no. Nature is no respecter of persons, and those who will not move and progress in harmony with her laws of advancement must, of necessity, pass out with the old. Alchemy, as it relates to the healing art, is the most noble in its object and beneficial in its effects of all the many subdivisions of the sciences, because it alleviates the pains and morbid afflictions of suffering humanity. We have given quite sufficient of its astrological aspect in the second part of the Light of Egypt, Volume I, wherein the four ancient elements are translated into their chemical correspondences of oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and carbon, which still constitute the four primary elements of the most advanced chemistry today. They enter more or less into every organic form and substance, which is known, in various combinations and proportions. The human organism is principally composed of them, so, likewise, is the food that supports physical life, and the air we breathe is but modifications of the same atoms. As a man's constitution embraces a microscopic atom of all the essences and elements corresponding to the whole, so does the air, and much that we depend upon our food to supply can be extracted from the atmosphere by breathing. Every breath we breathe is new life or death. Herein is the secret of success or failure in certain localities and under certain conditions. If we have iron within us, could we extract or attract iron from Saturn's district? Or if the element within us could attract gold, could we obtain it from the coal fields? Therefore, it is only natural that the medical remedies we employ to restore the organism, when afflicted with disease, should group themselves into similar correspondences, and so, in a general sense, we find them, for we note that the brain, the circulation, the lungs, and the stomach are the four chief citadels of the body. The heart, of course, representing the center of circulation, and this also explains further
if that were necessary, why the principal remedies of the homeopathic system are so speedy and direct in their action. The four principal drugs which stand as representatives of their class are aconite, belladonna, phosphorus, and pulsatilla. These represent the quadrant, for light is not more nicely adjusted to the eye, nor sound to the ear, than aconite to the circulation, belladonna to the brain, phosphorus to the lungs, and pulsatilla to the stomach, while ramifying in the 7 directions indicated by the 7 primary planets, we find stimulants, tonics, narcotics, nervines, alteratives, cathartics, and diuretics as the natural material correspondences thereof. That we assign phosphorus to the lungs may appear startling to the orthodox student, especially when he calls to mind the fact that phosphorus has long been recognized in medical science as a brain food and medicine. Anticipating such mental questions, we reply that in medicine, from the alchemical view, we are occupying a wholly different standpoint, i.e., the power of controlling the functional action of the body. In this view of the case, and the fact that the lungs and the brain are in the most perfect affinity, there will remain no mystery upon the subject. The alchemy of stones and gems attracts our next attention. Affinities and antipathies to the human constitution are to be found in these crystallized representatives of the subtle, invisible influences emanating from our planetary system. They are the mediums for the transmission of corresponding attributes and influences of existing powers and potencies, and if carried or worn upon the person, they will bring the person in direct rapport with the invisible forces within the universal system. Here again, Hahnemann's scientific philosophy would prove effectual, that similia similibus curantur. Would the fiery influence of a topaz attract much from the realms of a chrysolite, or the crystallized airy forces of a sapphire be a suitable medium for the earthly forces of a jasper? Gems and stones are dead or living realities. They live, slumber, and die, and have their potent existence, as do the organic forms of matter. They are usually imbued with the vivifying spark of divinity, and shine forth and exert their influence through the magical powers attracted to them from the forces of nature. A real living entity abides within them that can be seen by the clairvoyant vision, and to the trained student in occult lore, this entity can be made to become an obedient servant, giving warning of the approach of danger, impressions of men and things, and warding off discordant influences surrounding us, or that which we may contact from the magnetic and personal environments in our relations in the social world, or that which may be projected to us from the invisible realms of life. Think you the pyramids would be intact today if the stones from which they were built had been promiscuously selected? They were chosen by adepts in the knowledge of the laws of correspondence and antipathy and affinity. The Sphinx also stand as monuments to the heights of wisdom that man can attain. Metals also can be followed out on the same lines as the gems and stones. Much as we would like to continue, we are compelled to bring this discourse to a close, even though in doing so we must, of necessity, omit much of vital interest to the student. We will, therefore, only add that the 7 basic metals stand as the crystallized representatives of their respective groups: gold for the sun, silver for the moon, tin for Jupiter, copper for Venus, quicksilver for Mercury, and lead for Saturn. Each finds its own sphere of action within the temporary abiding place of the human soul on earth, the physical body. So, likewise, the 12 constellations and their corresponding talismanic gems, representing in their glittering array the anatomical zodiac of the human frame, and typifying the spiritual quality of the atoms, they are congregated in every degree of life. These and 1,000 other mysteries had we the time, might be unfolded to the student's view with considerable advantage, but we are compelled to refrain. The philosopher's stone is near at hand. Seek it not in remote spheres or distant parts of the earth, for it is ever around you and within, and becomes the golden key of true wisdom, which prepares the soul for its higher life and brighter destiny. It is the still small voice of the awakened soul that purges the conscience from suffering and the spiritual body from earthly dross. It is that which treasures not the corrupting, delusive wealth of earth, nor the transient powers of mammon, but garners the fruits which spring from the pure life, and treasures the jewels of heaven. Vainly will you seek for the stone of the wise philosopher amid the turmoils, sufferings, and selfishness of life, unless you accept your mission upon earth as a duty delegated to the soul from heaven. Eschew the evil thereof, and hold fast that which is good. To do this means to expand with the inward truth and become one of the pure in heart, in which blessed state the magical white stone, conveying a new name, reveals the living angel within to the outward man. Then and then alone doth he know the Adonai. Such are the divine spiritual principles upon which the higher alchemy of life is based. They seek only to establish a divine conscious at one-ment between the angel, the man, and the universe. And to this end, we conclude with the words of the immortal Paracelsus: to grasp these invisible elements, to attract them by their material correspondences, to control, purify, and transmute them by the ever-moving powers of the living spirit. This is true alchemy.
End of section 9. Recording by Jill Preston. Section 10 of The Light of Egypt, or The Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Preston. The Light of Egypt, or The Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2, by Thomas Burgone. Chapter 9. Talismans. Words are the symbols of ideas and bear the same correspondence to the physical brain as matter does to spirit, a medium of expression, and are subject to continual change in their application and meaning in exact proportion to the changing mental and moral condition of the people. As the planet, as well as man, is continually progressing, so must there be a higher and nobler conception of ideas. Hence, words or expressions must change to convey the progressive spirit that is constantly taking place. Therefore, it is always interesting as well as valuable for the occult student to go to the root of each word connected with his philosophy, in order to learn the real sense in which the word was used by the ancients, from whom his mystical lore has descended. The true meaning, as well as the words themselves, have become as mystical as the lore itself. Hence, each student must commence as a beginner in any foreign language which he does not at present understand. In following this method of procedure, he will at last escape the dense and interminable confusion of modern opinions upon subjects of which the writers thereof are partially or wholly ignorant. No better illustration of this can be afforded than by the word talisman, derived from the Greek verb teleo, which means primarily to accomplish or bring into effect. But in its real and therefore higher sense, it means to dedicate, consecrate, and initiate into the arcana of the temple mysteries. But in the present day, it means a piece of imposture connected with some magical hocus pocus of the ignorant and superstitious mind, a vulgar charm that is supposed to bring the owner thereof some material benefit, irrespective of his mental, magnetic, and moral condition, and, says the learned Webster,
After describing his idea of such things, they consist of three sorts: astronomical, magical, and mixed. But in what sense the astronomical differed from the magical, we are not informed, nor is any light thrown upon the peculiar nature of that class designated as mixed. In fact, the lexicographer so mixes up his definitions that we are unable to distinguish anything in particular but his own individual ignorance. So it has become in every branch of learning. Words and their meanings have become so mixed in their use and application that the world is full of discords and misunderstandings, which lead into dissensions and contention among all schools of thought, sects, and isms, and lastly, though not the least serious, it has reached into the close relations of the human family. All writers and speakers, as well as the readers and listeners, should acquaint themselves with the derivation and meaning of words.
The fact stands very clearly defined that talismans are confused in the minds of the present generation with magical charms, which depend for their effects upon the power of the idea or thought, which the formulating magician impresses upon the substance of which they are composed. If the magical artist be expert and endowed with an exceedingly potent will, his charm may become very powerful when worn by the person for whom it was prepared. But if this one grand essential be lacking, no amount of cabalistical figures and sacred names will have any effect, because there can be no potency in symbols apart from the ideas and mental force they are capable of rousing in the mind of the maker. Solomon's seal is no more powerful when drawn upon virgin parchment with a weak will, or in a mechanical state of mind, than a child's innocent scribbling upon its slate. But if the artist realizes the mysteries symbolized by the interlacing triangles, and can place his soul in rapport with the invisible elements they outwardly represent, then powerful effects are often produced. I am sorry to say that the knowledge of charms is not confined to the creation of beneficial talismans. Its perversion has led to the diabolical practices of the voodoo and black magician, whose work is wholly either for gain or revenge. Nothing but the most extreme selfishness lies beneath such immoral practices. But as there must be a light to reflect a shadow, so a charm must follow a talisman. Magical charms, then, are simply natural objects, possessing but little active virtue in themselves, but owing to the mediumistic nature of their substances, are endowed with artificial powers of temporary duration, by virtue of the idea and thought impressed upon them through the mental magic of the maker, and in this sense a charm must be clearly distinguished from Tellio, the talisman. The very names suggest their difference, and above all other men, students in occultism should strive to become thoroughly educated in the true sense of the term, men of letters, by virtue of, as Ruskin calls it, the kingship of words. Charm is derived from the Latin carmen, a song that fascinates, and means to control by incantation, to subdue, while Tellio concerns the secret powers and wisdom of consecration and initiation. It is because of modern misuse of antique terms that we have considered this somewhat lengthy explanation necessary in order to clear away the accumulated debris of the ages from the true foundation of our present study. A talisman is a natural object containing the elemental forces of its own degree of life in a state of intense activity, and capable of responding to the corresponding quality of life outside of itself, that emanates from the same spiritual state, either by sympathetic vibration or antagonistic currents, the nature, power, quality, and degree of life which the various natural objects represent, being a part of the temple curriculum of initiation. Hence, the name by which the latent power of these natural objects became known was in strict harmony with the facts involved. In order to prevent any possible misconception upon the subject, let us briefly restate the definition in a different way. A talisman is the exact antipodes of a charm. This latter is the artful and temporary result of man's mental power; the former, the natural production of universal nature, and as permanent and enduring as the substance of which it is composed during the present cycle. And yet, in some sense, it may be quite correct to say that a talisman acts like a charm, and vice versa, that charms act like a talisman, providing that the real vital difference between them is maintained in the statement. Now that we have our subject clearly defined, let us carefully examine how and in what sense a given natural object becomes talismanic. For it must appear self-evident to all that one and the same substance cannot constitute a talisman for everyone and for everything. They must naturally differ as widely in their nature and quality as mankind differ in physical, mental, moral, ethical, and temperamental development. And yet, though man may so differ from his fellow man, the ignorant Esquimaux killing seals in his kayak may belong to the same spiritual quality of life as the Harvard professor who obtains his subsistence by daily discourse upon the sublime harmony of the infinitely small with the infinitely great throughout the manifested universe of matter. And wherever we find this kinship of the spirit, we shall find the same identical talisman acting alike upon each, whenever they shall come in rapport with it. Mental, moral, and physical development never alter the real nature of the eternal man. Culture only brings to the surface into active use the latent possibilities lying concealed within the human soul. It only allows him to exercise his functions upon different planes and with different effect. Every natural department of nature corresponds to some peculiar specific quality and degree of life. These have been divided, for the sake of convenience, into 4 primary groups, and each group again subdivided into 3, corresponding to the 4 cardinal, 4 succedent, and 4 cadent houses of the astrological chart. Therefore, the 12 signs of the zodiac, these constituting the cycle of necessity within physical conditions, wherein the ever measuring or decreasing tidal flow of life from solar radiation throughout the year represents the 12 groups of humanity, of lower animated nature, of vegetation, and crystallized gems. Every human being is ushered into the world under the direct influx of one or more of these celestial divisions, and by virtue of the sign occupying the horizon at the moment of birth, absorbs such influx and becomes endowed with a specific polarity, by virtue of which lie ever afterward, during such expression within physical conditions, inspires with every breath that specific life quality from the atmosphere, corresponding to the same degree of the universal spirit. Consequently, that gem or those gems, representing and corresponding to his house of life, become to him a talisman because of their relationship, their spiritual affinity. These are all given in the second part of Volume 1. The metals never become talismanic because of their comparatively negative degree of life, and for this reason also they make the most powerful charms. Certain combinations of metals and in proper proportions increase the potency and magnetic influence of a charm, and here, too, the lies of antipathy and affinity come into practical use. A true expert will know his metals or metal and his client before commencing his magical work. Those persons who derive most virtue from a talisman are those who belong to the most sensitive or interior state within such degree of life, and who are dominated by one sign only. Thus, if we find one sign occupying the whole of the house of life, or practically so, as when the first face of a sign ascends, we may be sure, other things not interfering, that such a native will receive great benefit from wearing its talismanic gem. If a person of good intellectual powers and sensitive spirituality be born when the Lord of the ascendant occupies the rising sign, as, for instance, correction. If a person of good intellectual powers and sensitive spirituality be born when the Lord of the ascendant occupies the rising sign, as, for instance, Mars in Aries or Sun in Leo, we may be sure that the talismanic gem in their case will be exceedingly powerful, because all the astrophysical conditions, and then most favorably for the expression of natural forces, and if worn upon or near that part of the body which the sign rules, the power and influence is more powerful and beneficial. In wearing them, take them to you as a part of yourself, a part of your higher self, a thing to be heeded, listened to, and obeyed. They will usually make their presence most pronounced when something arises to disturb the harmonious vibrations that naturally and quietly go on between the person and the interstellar spaces above. They are like the sensor and motor nerves. They never make their presence known except when danger encroaches. Having explained in what sense gems become talismanic, we have now to disclose the modus operandi, the how. The gems contain the life quality of their own astral nature. Man, as a higher expression only of the same universal biune life, contains the same. Like two electric currents, man, the positive pole, comparatively, attracts unto himself the mineral life of the gem, which thus becomes the negative pole. A complete circuit is formed and maintained as long as they remain in contact. Gems belonging to a different quality of life, not being in rapport with his astral state, have no good effect, because no current flows between them. Thus, the talisman acts in unison with the psychic or soul principle of man, aiding the organism to sustain health, stimulating the mental perceptions and spiritual intuition, and affording, in a remarkable manner, many premonitions of coming danger, when the individual is sufficiently sensitive to perceive them. And now, per contra, as there are gems that act in sympathy with man, there must be, and in fact are, gems that act upon contrary principles, i.e., antagonistic, and these belong to purely antagonistic elements, as air to earth and fire to water, unless the native be born under both forces, as Mars in Cancer rising, or the latter part of one sign and nearly the whole of another of an opposite nature, occupying the ascendant. Such natives are pure neutrals, and such might wear the gems that belong to the most powerful planet of the horoscope, or that triplicity holding the most planets. Then they are usually combined, the planet and the triplicity. There are, of course, innumerable substances more or less capable of talismanic virtue to particular individuals, but those gems and similar ones that are given in The Light of Egypt, Volume 1, are the most powerful. To these may be added the opal under Scorpio, the garnet under Aries, and the turquoise under Cancer, when Saturn is therein, and the aquamarine under Pisces. And among the temporary talismans of vegetation, we may add that the young shoots bearing the flower and seed vessels are the portions of chief virtue, and the young shoots of trees. These are often used in locating mines, wells, oils, etc., that lie hidden beneath the surface of the earth, and in the hands of a negative, sensitive person, seldom fail to reward the searcher with success. These should always be gathered when their ruling correspondences are rising, or better still, culminating upon the meridian. These will be explained in the chapter on the magic wand. We have now reached the limits of our present study, and have only to state that all gems, like the human organism, are in one of three conditions: alive and conscious, asleep and unconscious, or dead and powerless. These conditions can only be discovered in stones by the trained lucid, or the instructed neophyte. Stones that are sleeping require to be awakened. This, also, can only be done by the trained student or adept. Those that are dead are useless as talismans, no matter how beautiful they appear as ornaments. Gems and stones are also sexed, and those who wear them would receive the best effect if they should wear those of opposite sex, although either is powerfully potent in their influence upon the individual. How very ignorant the children of men are of the subtle, silent, yet obedient servants that everywhere surround them. Here again that divine spark, which lies embedded within the crystallized forces of nature, is exerting its subtle, spiritual influence in making man's very selfishness and love of ornament and show a means to bring forth these silent monitors, knowing ere long that their true power and potency will be known, and consciously utilized by him as potent factors in his soul's evolvement and physical development. The 12 representative gems within the cold stratas of matter stand as the material representatives of their stellar counterparts in the sky, and constitute the beautiful, glittering, but crystallized zodiac of man's physical anatomy. End of section 10. Recording by Jill Preston. Section 11 of The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Preston. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2, by Thomas Burgone. Section 11. Ceremonial Magic. The above title has been selected chiefly because, in most works treating upon magic, we find it wrongly used, and therefore take the opportunity of explaining the matter. 4. There were no such terms in the vocabulary of the ancient magi. It is unfortunate that words of ancient origin are not more carefully used, and that we should attach so many different meanings to the same word. The terms ceremony and ceremonial are nothing more nor less than what that eminent critic, John Ruskin, would designate as bastards of ignoble origin, which somehow or another have usurped the places of rite and ritual. The word rite has descended to us from the Latin ritus of our Roman ancestors, and they received it from the more ancient rita of the Sanskrit, the Greek equivalent of which is rio, and means the method or order of service to the gods, whereas ceremony may mean anything and everything, from the terms of a brutal prize fight to the conduct of divine service within the church. But no such chameleon-like definition or construction can properly be placed upon the word rite, for it means distinctly, if it means anything at all, the serious usage and sacred method of conducting service in honor of the gods or of superiors, and requires the attendance of the prophet or priest, or someone duly qualified to fulfill such sacred functions for the time being. The ritual of magic, then, is the correct title of this present study, and as such, we shall, henceforth, term it as we proceed with the course. Man is especially, and above all creatures, an organizing force, and when to this fact we add the most interior and powerful of his sentimental instincts, veneration for the powers that be, and for the higher, invisible forces of nature, his religiosity, as it has been aptly termed, we cannot wonder that the earliest races, of which we possess any record, are chiefly distinguished for their imposing and elaborate religious rites. In fact, it is to the stupendous temples and a colossal sacerdotalism that we are indebted for 9/10 of the relics and records which we possess of them. So true is this that, from what we have been able to discover, we are quite justified in asserting that the ancient races were, above all other things, a profoundly religious people. The temple was the center around which revolved all their genius and art, and the sacred edifice became their grandest achievement in architecture, and its high priest the most powerful individual in the state. In fact, it was in consequence of the real power invested in such sacred office that it was so intimately connected with the throne, and why royalty so frequently belonged to the priesthood or exercised priestly functions. And there can be no real doubt but that amongst the pastoral and more spiritual races of Earth's earliest inhabitants, the priest, by reason of his superior wisdom, was the first lawgiver, and, by virtue of his sanctity of person and elevation of mind, became their first primitive king, a patriarchal monarch, whose scepter and symbol of power was the shepherd's peaceful crook, just as among the ruder nomads of the inhospitable North we find the greatest hunters invested with the dignity of chief, whose significant symbol and scepter of royalty upon their Nimrod thrones was the trusty, successful spear. And the times in which we live have had their full effect upon these symbols, so significant of rule. The monarch has transformed the spear into the less harmful mace, while the church has added an inch of iron to the crook. Therefore, the former has become less warlike, and the latter less peaceful. And verily, in actual life, we find them so. The patriarchal sire, head of the tribal household, was the original priest and the hearthstone, the first altar around which the family rites were performed. And from this pure and primitive original have been evolved through progressive ages the stately temple and the sacred person of the despotic pontiff. From the sincere prayer, the pure aspirations of the human heart, and the joyous offerings of fruits and flowers to the invisible powers around them, and from the souls of their beloved ancestors, has arisen the costly and complicated ritual of theology. And if the theologians of today really knew the lost, secret meaning of their complicated rituals, and the unseen powers lying behind their external symbols, their anxieties for the continued life of their dying creeds would be turned to new hopes and faith, which could be demonstrated to their equally blind followers, that which they were teaching they knew, and could practically use the knowledge given forth in their sanctuaries. And instead of offering up their supplications to an imaginary personal deity, their words, rites, and ceremonies would take on the form and power that such should command, and they would become truly what their title really means, a doctor of the soul. Then could they intelligently lead and direct the souls of their followers to the path of Christ, truth, which leads up to salvation, not a vicarious atonement, but gaining the at-one-ment through the individual soul's development to a conscious relation to that divine spirit we call God, where it can say, I know. Out of those simple gifts, which were the spontaneous offerings of loving remembrance and unselfish charity, have grown the prayers, penances, sacrifices, and servile worship of sacerdotalism. Out of the paternal consideration and love of the aged sire has evolved the haughty, chilling pride of the selfish, isolated priest, and which reflects its baneful influence upon the worshipers at their feet. They have also changed their once sacred, faithful, and reverent obedience into suspicion and distrust, and with the educated to utter disgust. The light has been extinguished, and priest and people alike are groping about in darkness. It is strange, yea, passing strange, the amount of human ignorance and folly that is revealed. When we look upon this picture and then upon that, verily we cannot help but ask the question, is mankind really progressing? We know that it is. We are keenly alive to the truth that the anthem of creation sounds out, Excelsior, move on, but how and in what way, spiritually, we fail to comprehend. The cyclic development of the human soul is an inscrutable mystery. All the considerations above presented must be thoroughly weighed and understood in order to arrive at the true value of the dogma and ritual of high magic, as Eliphas Levi terms it, because, amid the vast array of tinsel drapery, the outcome of man's vain conceit and bombastic pride, we shall find very little that can be considered as vital and really essential to the rites of magic. The show, the drapery, the priestly ornaments and instruments are to the really spiritual occultist but as sounding brass and a tinkling cymbal. That they had and still have their legitimate uses is true, but these uses do not concern magic per se, nor its manifold powers. They awed the popular mind and impressed upon the masses a due reverence for the powers that be. They were instrumental in holding the untrained passions of the common herd in check by a wholesome fear of summary vengeance from the gods, so that this pageantry of magic, the outward priestly show, was more of a politic development than a spiritual necessity, an astute but philosophical method of enabling the educated few to govern the uneducated many. And it was only when the educational and initiatory rites of the temple became corrupt, and the priest became the persecuting ally of the king, when in real fact the priest lost his spirituality in the desire for temporal power and place, that the people began to disbelieve his professions and rebel against his tyrannical control. The powers that be are now wielding their sword of justice and unfurling the knowledge of freedom and truth to the aspiring mind of man. He has begun to feel his bondage and the yoke of oppression. The words of promise and love, instead of lifting him up to the God he has been taught to worship, bow him down in slavish obedience to his priest. Mankind cannot remain in this mental and spiritual darkness much longer. Already I see the break of day, the dawn of a new life, a new religion, or rather the reestablishing of the true, which is as old as time itself. There is but one law, one principle, one word, one truth, and one God. The original requirements for the office of priest and the rites of magic were, as shown, a primitive, i.e., pure mind, one that had outgrown the lusts and passions of youth, a person of responsibility and experience. And even to this day the priest of the Roman Church is called by the familiar title of Father. And as nature does not alter her laws and requirements in obedience to the moral development of the race, we may rest assured that the same requirements of 10,000 years ago still hold good today. You may enter your magic circle, draw with prescribed rites, and you may intone your consecrations and chant your incantations. You may burn your incense in the brazen censer and pose in your flowing priestly robes. You may bear the sacred pentacles of the spirit upon your breast and wave the magic sword to the four quarters of the heavens. Yea, you may even do more. You may burn the secret sigil of the abjurant spirit and yell your conjurations and exorcisms till you are black in the face, but all in vain, my friend, all in vain. It will prove nothing but vanity and vexation of spirit, unless the inward self, the soul, interblends with the outward world, and, contacting by its own dynamic intensity the elemental vibrations of nature, arouses these spiritual forces to the extent of responding to your call. When this can be done, but not until then, will your magical incantations have any effect upon the voiceless air. Not the priestly robes, nor magic sword, not the incantations, written word, nor mystic circle can produce nature's response to occult rite, but the fire of the inward spirit, the mental realization of each word and mystic sign, combined with the conscious knowledge of your deific powers, this, and this only, creates nature's true magician. Who and where can such be found? Are they so few that the echo answers back, where and who? Yet there are many such upon the earth at the present time, but the present mental conditions forbid them making their identity known. They would not be recognized and accepted as the true teachers, but reviled and persecuted and dubbed as insane. But silently they are sowing the seed of truth that will spring up and bear fruit where and when least expected. Because evil is so active, truth is not lying dormant. The spirit of God, that divine spark of deity within every human soul, never sleeps, never rests. On and upward is its cry. Omnia vincent veritas. The grand sublimity of man's conception of at one with the infinite Father, at one with the limitless universe of being, at one with and inheriting all the sacred rights and inalienable prerogatives of the ineffable Adonai of the deathless soul, is the only test of man's qualification for the holy office. For, as Bulwer Lytton has truthfully said, the loving throb of one great human heart will baffle more friends than all the magician's lore. So it is with the sacred ritual. One single aspirational thought, clearly defined, outweighs all the priestly trappings that the world has ever seen. The success of all incarnations depends upon the complete unison of voice and mind, the interblend of which produces the dynamic intonation that chords with the inward rhythmic vibrations of the soul. Once this magical dynamic vibration is produced, there immediately springs into being the whole elemental world belonging thereto. By correspondence, vocalists who hold their audiences spellbound do so by virtue of the magical vibrations they produce, and are in reality practical, even though unconscious, magicians. The same power, to a degree, lies in the voice when speaking, the graceful movement of the hand when obeying the will, and the eye rays forth the same dynamic power, and becomes magical in its effects. These powers are exercised more upon the physical plane, and no better illustration can be given than the power man is able to exert over the animal when gazing into its eyes. Here, as well as in incantations and invocations, within the power of the will, lies the success or failure. At this point it may be asked, what, then, is the use of magical rites, of symbols and priestly robes? We answer, in themselves alone, nothing, absolutely nothing, except the facility and convenience we derive from system, order, and a code of procedure. To this may be added the mental force and enthusiasm of soul, which such things inspire, just as men and women may feel more dignified, artistic, and refined when dressed in accordance with their ideas. So may the average priest feel more priestly, holy, and consequently more powerful mentally, when arrayed in the robes of his office and surrounded by the outward symbols of his power and functions. But in themselves alone there is not, nor can there be, any real virtue. The same may be said of the incantations. The words used in their composition are the hieroglyphics of mystical ideas. Therefore, the correct pronunciation of the words or the grammatical construction of a sentence is nothing, if the underlying idea is conceived in the mind and responded to by the soul. Will and motive form the basis of true magic. One word more and we have completed our subject. Magic swords, rings, pentacles, and wands may, and often are powerful magical agents in the hands of the magician by virtue of the power or charm that is invested within them when properly prepared, but apart from such preparation by those who know, they are as powerless as unintelligible incantations. All the foregoing are aids, but if physical manifestations of magical forces be required, there must always be present the necessary vital, magnetic pabulum by means of which such phenomena are made to transpire, and, in every case, to be successful, the assistance of a good natural magician or seer is necessary, for without this essential element the whole art in its higher aspects becomes abortive. End of Section 11. Recording by Jill Preston. Section 12 of The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Preston. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2, by Thomas Burgone. Chapter 11. The Magic Wand. This is the last lesson of our present course that requires a clear definition of the terms employed in the title thereof. For the 12th and final study is, perhaps, fortunate in having for its title a word that has not, so far, been misused and distorted from its original sense. The magic wand. The words savor of everything that the young tyro in occult art can picture to his mind, of the midnight magician and his mysterious, if not diabolical, arts, muttering his incantations, working his gruesome spells, and raising the restless ghosts of the dead. Strange fancies, these, and yet so corrupt and ignorant have become the conceptions of the popular mind regarding the once sacred science of the temple and the psychological powers of nature, that we very much question. If the ideas above stated were not very similar to the originals of each modern student, before he had become acquainted with the deeper truths, the realities of occult philosophy. We will commence our study by a careful investigation of the original meaning of the words magic wand, since those who were the masters and originators thereof are far more likely to know more about them than their degenerate offspring of a later age. Few, comparatively, would believe that the words magic, mason, and imagination are the present unrelated descendants of the same original conception, the root idea, but such is the case. First, then, we will examine their modern meanings. Magic is the unholy art of working secret spells, of using invisible powers and holding intercourse with the unseen world of ghosts and demons by means of enchantments. It is also means the expert deception of the senses by the tricks of a conjurer, so-called hocus pocus and fraud, and a magician is either an evil-minded, superstitious mortal, fool enough to believe in charms, or an expert pretender and impostor of the first water, who cheats and deceives the people. A Mason is the honorable designation of a builder who works in stone, metaphysically a member of a semi-secret society, whose sole advantage is social intercourse and standing, who proclaim fraternity and universal brotherhood theoretically and practice the reverse in reality. A man who apes the Egyptian Mason knows nothing in reality of Hiram, his master, who knows nothing of the starry Solomon or his mystic temple in the heavens which Hiram built, and who misconceives the import of the three villains or assassins, and who further knows nothing of that wonderful sprig of myrtle. In short, a Freemason, speaking generally, is a man who delights in ideals, social equality, secret fraternity, and plays at mysticism, who parades on the Masonic stage and enacts a role he does not understand. The first meaning, that of a builder, is the most correct. Lastly, the imagination is the exercise of mental imagery, the picturings of silent thought. And now we will proceed backwards. Imagination is from the word image, a form, a picture, and has descended to us from the Latin imago, which in its turn was derived from the old Semitic root mag. Mason comes to us from the Latin mass, which means to mold and form, i.e., to build, and the word mass, through various transformations, was also derived from the root word mag. Consequently, originally, there was but little difference in the ancient idea of building pictures in the mind and erecting the mental idea externally in stone. It is from this fact that we have today mental masons, a la the secret orders and stonemasons, who labor for wages. The mental masons have merely lost the knowledge of their art. They should, by rights, be as active and correspondingly useful today as their more physical brothers, the masons of stone. This art would never have fallen into disgrace and disuse if their daily bread or material accumulations had depended upon their efforts in building up the mental, moral, and spiritual attainments of each other, and bringing their knowledge into more external use by making the material edifice, the physical body, a purer and more fitting temple for the divine soul. Magic comes from the Latin magi and the Greek word magos, which means wise, learned in the mysteries, and was the synonym of wisdom. The initiated philosopher, the priest, and the wise men are all of them included in the magi. Again, tracing this word to its remote ancestor, we find it terminating in the same Semitic root, mag, but of this strange root no one was able to say much, except that it seemed to belong to the Assyrian branch of the great Semitic race. But quite recently, thanks to our scientific explorers and archaeologists, versed in the mysterious meaning of cuneiform inscription, Assyrian scholars now inform us that they have found the hoary, primitive original of it, of magic, magi, and imago, etc. It is from an old Akkadian word, imga, meaning wise, holy, and learned, and was used as the distinguishing title of their wisest sages, priests, and philosophers, who, as may be supposed, gradually formed a peculiar caste, which merged into the ruling priestly order. The Semites, who succeeded the old Akkadian race in the valley of the Euphrates as a mere matter of verbal convenience, transformed many of the old Akkadian words to suit their own articulation, and imga became mag, and thus magi. The blend between the Semitic and the older Akkadian race, produced by fusion of racial blood, the famed Chaldeans. So that we see how old are the words which many of us daily use, but with different meaning. Verily, it makes one feel, when he thinks of magic and its origin, as though he were quite nearly related to the people who honored King Sargon, the wise, the earthly original of the mystic Solomon of biblical tradition. The term wand is an old Saxon word which primarily signifies to set in motion, to move. From this we derive our word wander, i.e., to roam, and wandering, i.e., moving, and continually restless. We have now the original, therefore real, meaning of the words magic wand, thus an object that sets in motion the powers of the magician, and the magician, an initiate of the sacred rites, a master of wisdom, possessing all the resources that enable him to build, mold, and form, to create, in fact, by virtue of his knowledge of the secret powers of mental imagery and the potential use of his own imagination. He is both mental mason and learned philosopher. The student may doubtless ask, why all this care and labor regarding mere definitions? We reply that it is because the real meaning of the words we have purposely selected for the title of our studies are, in themselves, a far better revelation than we could possibly have written. Originally, ideas and words were related as absolute expressions or correspondences of each other. This is not so now. As the different races become interblended, the purity of both language and morals retrograded, and the people grew more to the external. The intuitions and spirit were compelled to retreat, giving place to only the intellectual and mental. The blending of the languages gave birth to many words, wherein different meanings were transmitted. Hence, the trouble arising today over the numerous interpretations of a single word. Hybrid races have no such thing as a pure language. Their ideas and languages, like their blood, is badly mixed up, confusing, and unsatisfactory, so far as the real meaning of the words are concerned. For this very reason, we find so many different meanings for the same word, and also for this reason, we cannot formulate a legal enactment in the Anglo-Saxon tongue that a learned lawyer, versed in this senseless jugglery of words, cannot demonstrate to the satisfaction of the courts, means something the very opposite of the real intentions, the spirit, which the framers thereof intended it to convey. Anciently, it required no artful cunning of the lawyer to interpret the laws. The words had only one simple and obvious meaning. If a language could be so constructed today, and the antiquated precedents of the courts annihilated, the legal profession would be exterminated inside of 12 months, and an affliction removed from the people. The philosophy of the magic wand is this: it is a magnetic, electric conductor for the magician's will. It directs the flow of his thought and concentrates it upon a given point in space or an object. It is, magically, what the sights of a rifle are to a sportsman. It enables him to focus his powers with exact precision upon the mark against which, or upon which, his will is directed. Apart from this, there is no power per se in the Wand itself, any more than there is in a lightning conductor without the electric storm. Ergo, the Wand is the conductor in the magician's hand for the lightnings of the soul, and just as the lightning rod is most useful and most powerful to protect when the storm is the strongest, so is the Wand more powerful in the hands of the most potential magician. We can only transmit through this Wand the degree of force we may happen to possess in the soul. In a properly prepared Wand lies the most powerful weapon to protect or destroy that can be placed within a magician's hands. With his own spiritual force and knowledge, combined with the magic power attached to the instrument, nothing can withstand its power when directed with a determined and powerful will. Many substances have been employed in the manufacture of these magic wands. Metals or stones will not serve this purpose unless covered with some organic matter. In any case, stones are worthless. The very finest wands are made from the live ivory of a female elephant. A short wand, 21 inches long, tipped with gold at the largest end and silver or copper at the other, is very powerful. Next to these costly articles are wands with a gold or copper core, a wire, in fact, cased with ebony, boxwood, rosewood, cedar, or sandalwood. English yew also serves the purpose. So does almond wood. Simpler, less expensive, and almost as effective are wands made of witch hazel. In fact, apart from the wands of live ivory, I consider that witch hazel is as powerful as the golden wand. Next in force to this witch hazel are the shoots of the almond tree, and lastly, the peach and swamp willow. The proper time to manufacture a magic wand is whenever you can find the person who is able to do the work. But after it is constructed, it must be thoroughly magnetized with proper ceremony and aspiration. The first or the second full moon after the sun enters Capricorn at midnight, when the moon will be culminating in her own sign upon the mid-heaven. The best time to cut a shoot of witch hazel or other material for a wand is the first full moon after the sun's entry into Capricorn at midnight, and then magnetize it upon the next full moon at the same hour. In conclusion, let us repeat that the magic wand is but the highly sensitive magical medium for transmitting and concentrating the force of the learned magician, that it is equally powerful under great excitement of mind, whether used consciously or not. The stream of mental fire will go in the direction the wand happens to be pointed, and therefore should never be in the hands of the wicked or foolish, any more than firearms. It is potential or otherwise in exact proportion to the artist's wisdom and dynamic mentality, and is useless in the hands of the idiotic or weak-minded. A magic wand requires brains and vigorous mental force to make it effective, just as the steam engine requires an apparatus for generating the steam that moves it. With a determined will and a mental conception of one's inward power, any man or woman can, by means of this sensitive wand, defy all the legionnaires of hell, and quickly disperse every form of spiritual iniquity. The firearms which have become so intricate in their mechanism and so destructive in their operations are only a degeneration of the magic wand. The first weapons of warfare and slaughter were very crude and clumsy, then larger and more destructive, until at last they have become as fine in texture and mechanical genius, compared with their early brothers, as the magic wand is today, above and beyond the present weapons of warfare. At last, the original mode of defense will be rediscovered and become a utility in the hands of the majority of mankind. At the same time, the mental and moral nature will be evolving into better conditions too, so that their use will not be given to the ignorant and evildoers, but placed in charge of the educated, those who are morally capable of leading and ruling. Yes, we are now stepping upon the plane of reason and intuition, where right, not might, will prevail and rule the world. The present mode of government and rule will be changed, and one of humanitarian justice takes its place. God hasten the millennium. End of section 12. Recording by Jill Preston. Section 13 of the Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Preston. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2, by Thomas Burgone. Chapter 12. The Tablets of Aeth, in 3 parts. Part 1, the 12 mansions. Part 2, the 10 planetary rulers. Part 3, the 10 great powers of the universe. Part 1 of the 12 mansions. Here beginneth chapter 1 of the book which is called the Tablets of Aeth, wherein is transcribed the first quadrant of the 12 mansions. I sent my soul through the invisible, some lesson of that after life to spell, and by my soul returned to me, and answered, I, myself, am heaven and hell. The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on, nor all your pity nor wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all your tears wash out a word of it. Aries. Symbol: a deep blue sky, a blaze as if something were about to rise. 1. Reflection. Tablet the first. The blush of dawn of a new life, all nature quivering with the sense of coming, conscious life, Isis, vibrant with love of the coming child, her bosom flushed in expectation of the little sun soon to breathe on her yearning breast. In this we trace the great lesson of preparation, of sending the light before the form, of the prophecy before the fulfillment. Dawn must precede sunrise. What you expect will be your destiny. It is the longing of centuries that incarnates a God, a real sun god, whose vibrant love life can thrill other lives into prayer, aspiration, the struggle for eternal life. The dawn represents the expectant maternity of nature, God. O child of Adam, see that thou expecteth much, and that thy aspirations are reflected in thy outward life. Tablet the second, Taurus, symbol, a red sun on the horizon of an inky sea. 2. Reflection. Tablet the second. Nature has shown forth her glory as brought forth by young Horus, but her creative force is still unreflected. The sea is black and inky. The Son of God is born, but the sea of human life still remains unconscious in primeval darkness. The angles of the sun and the sea are not yet in right relation to each other. A few, standing on the watchtowers of life, seeing the red glow of the risen sun, call, "Look!" But the unfortunate ones in the outer darkness cry, as they beat their breasts, "No! There is no light. You do but dream." And yet the Sun of Life has risen. The divine light glows. O child of Adam, remember that in him was life, and life was the light of man, and the light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Tablet the third, Gemini, symbol, 2 stars are rising at angles to each other and to the polar star, while 8 stars shine faintly in the black space of background. 3. Reflection. Tablet the third. The divine symbol of soul matehood is here signified in the 2 stars rising in the foreground, not only the soul affinities of humanity, but the eternal father-mother forces manifested in the biune spirit of universal life and nature, the 2 great creative powers, life and light, whose harmony creates love, attraction and repulsion, and the straight lines of law and justice, which blend in the spiral of mercy. The 2 stars are rising at an oblique angle to the pole star, the center around which material things revolve. So, too, life and love are balanced by the star of wisdom. Love in the spirit is adaptation to the environment in matter and providence in universal life. The 8 stars reveal the mystery of the tablet, universal death present with life. The final end of all discord glimmers faintly afar off, and man questions the love of God, seeing that all things pass away, not realizing that death is the germinal promise of life, of transformation, of the realization of unrealized hopes, of the union of loving hearts in their starry pilgrimage back to the Father's home. O child of Adam, listen unto the words of the teacher. I and the Father are one. Suffer little children to come unto me, for of such I the kingdom of heaven. Part 1. Here beginneth chapter 2 of the book, which is called the Tablets of Aeth, wherein is transcribed the second quadrant of the 12 mansions. How they struggle in the immense universe, how they whirl and seek. Innumerable souls that all spring forth from the vast world soul. They drop from planet to planet, and in the abyss they weep for their forgotten land. These are thy tears, O Dionysus, O spirit vast, divine one, liberator. Draw back thy daughters to the breast of light. Ah, love, could you and I with him conspire to grasp this sorry scheme of things entire, would we not shatter it to bits, and then remold it nearer to the heart's desire? Tablet the fourth, Cancer. Symbol: a woman's face, unconscious, in trance, surrounded by clouds. 4. Reflection. Tablet the fourth. The dreaming woman, whose brooding thoughts shape the coming man. The race is never any farther advanced than the average thought of the woman. She is yet sleeping, knowing not her powers. So, not until she awakes and recognizes herself as conceiving by the Holy Ghost and the mother of the incarnate God, will that God be brought forth into universal knowledge. In this is the great lesson to women. Ever remember thy creative power as the mother of the humanity of the future. The sun in thy mansion exerts its highest power. Awake, therefore, O soul, and eclipse not its brightness with thy dreams of sublunary power. O child of Adam, ever honor the womb that gave thee birth, and know that all thy earthly greatness received its seed therefrom. A fountain cannot rise higher than its source. Tablet the fifth. Leo. Symbol: a man's arm, bent, exceedingly muscular, a knife in the hand, a streak of lightning opposite the arm, which is defying the lightning. 5. Reflection. Tablet the fifth. Here we have the symbol of the incarnate fire of the spirit defying the mere natural fire of the heavens. The woman sleeps and broods and dreams, but the man she has brought forth is awake, and bids defiance to the fiery forces of nature. He has armed himself with the keen knife of action, and with it has conquered the forces of matter. He has harnessed the lightning and made the electric fluid his obedient slave, and thus has he mastered all forces inferior to spirit, that spirit of conscious life, which is his birthright. The lesson to be gleaned from this is that the kingdom of nature must be taken by storm. Not for rest, but for work, has Mother Nature sent forth her man-child. Not for peace, but for battle. Not for inertia, but for effort. O child of Adam, arm yourself with the sword, mayhap the sword of affliction, and, gallantly raising the strong right hand aloft, hurl defiance at the chaos of nature, sure that the fire from the sun of the spirit is burning in every vein of that arm. Tablet the sixth. Virgo. Symbol: a lotus rising from the water, coiled around its stem a snake, whose efforts fail to reach the flower. 6. Reflection. Tablet the sixth. Here we have the sacred flower, symbol of the virgin soul, uncontaminated by the snake of passion, which can only enfold the body, the stem, the snake of matter, of lust, of evil. But the flower of the spirit, the soul, lifts its pure white petals upward as an incense cup to the sun of the spirit. In this symbol read the great lesson of the experience of evil. If the flower of the soul blossoms, the mud of the soil and the snake of the passions are but the surroundings of its roots and stem. Both are necessary for the perfection of the flower. The roots sink deep into Mother Earth and draw nourishment and life, lifting matter upward, while the snake of passion becomes, under another aspect, the serpent of wisdom. Coiled around the stem of this life, it gives to the incarnated soul that wisdom which later blossoms in the seraph of the sun spheres. O child of Adam, take suffering if it forge the sword of the spirit. Take evil and passion and turn them into deep lessons of life, blossoming the evil into good, changing passion into wisdom. Only the pure in heart can see God. Part 1. Here beginneth chapter 3 of the book, which is called the Tablets of Aeth, wherein is transcribed the third quadrant of the 12 mansions. To know what really exists, one must cultivate silence with oneself, for it is in silence that the eternal and unexpected flowers open, which change their form and color according to the soul in which they grow. Souls are weighed in silence as gold and silver are weighed in pure water. The worldly hope men set their hearts upon turn to ashes, or it prospers, and anon, like snow upon the desert's dusty face, lighting a little hour or two, is gone. Tablet the 7th, Libra. Symbol: a crowned king with a scythe raised in the air, looks closely at two boys wrestling beneath him in a field of grain, a red poppy below them. 7. Reflection. Tablet the 7th, the symbol of nature's eternal war for the impossible equilibrium between spirit and matter, the symbol, also, of time, which is but the illusion in which eternity clothes itself, forever putting on and forever putting off new garments of matter. The crowned king is the victorious soul, waiting with the scythe of time to reap the harvest of the world, while incarnated man, as represented in the wrestling youths, is struggling for that which he did not produce, and which only death can reap. The poppy reveals the secret of the illusions of nature's master showman. All earthly things are unreal to the spirit, which is the only real thing. Man's effort to hoard and save the things of this world is injustice to others. The struggle is eternal, and no matter how careful or cunning man is to monopolize either power, truth, or wealth, swift-footed time will readjust all things without error. O child of Adam, lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. Tablet the 8th, Scorpio. Symbol: a wide and plain, on it a skeleton, a dull gray sky, in which an eagle soars, full fed, it seems, from the flesh of the skeleton. 8. Reflection. Tablet the 8th, a significant symbol to the seer, showing forth the two ultimates of life and death, of earthly things and sex. Scorpio is both the eagle of the spirit, soaring aloft, well fed with all that is worth carrying away from the earth, and also the scorpion, whose natural home is the desert. Tablet the 8th, a significant symbol to the seer, showing forth the two ultimates of life and death, of earthly things and sex. Scorpio is both the eagle of the spirit, soaring aloft, well fed with all that is worth carrying away from the earth, and also the scorpion, whose natural home is the desert. In sex, either way, life is given. Shall it be to your spirit, making fat and full your immortal self, or will the other interpretation be yours? And will you leave yourself dead and annihilated, a skeleton to the ego, the divine spirit? For sex is indeed the foundation of all. Raised to the region of Libra, it is power and magnetism. To the bosom it is love. To the brain it is enthusiasm. It is the Promethean fire of life, the creative force, giving vigor to whatever region to which it is raised or lowered to be spent with no returns. It debases and renders life a desert of dry bones. O child of Adam, reflect on the fall of man from spirit to matter, and combine the wisdom of the serpent with the purity of the dove, and lest ye partake of the trees of life, ye shall surely die. Tablet the 9th, Sagittarius. Symbol: A child in a shell, holding in its hand a feathered lance, is drawn by 5 stars grouped in an under arc. 9. Reflection. Tablet the 9th. The symbol of the conscious soul. The shell is the body drawn by the 5 senses, stars, which form an under arc to represent the world of material things and our relation thereto. The child armed with the feathered lance is the soul. Riding thus, fully armed in the shell of the body, it realizes the duality of truth, that all things are changeable, and that each thing is true upon the plane of its manifestation, while an allusion to that which is interior to its life, while the soul is in its dream state. Sagittarius represents conservatism and the permanence of crystallized institutions. But when the spirit awakes and bursts the shell of matter, the senses, instead of being the guardians and jailers of its environment, become its servants, and the means by which, united as the one ego, sense perception, it races o'er the fields of Aeth, a being of life and beauty, shining in the empty ring of God. O child of Adam, ever remember that temperament and environment constitute the north and south poles of human possibility, and that ability, combined with opportunity, is the measure of responsibility. Part 1. Here beginneth chapter 4 of the book, which is called The Tablets of Aeth, wherein is transcribed the 4th quadrant of the 12 mansions. A hair, perhaps, divides the false and true. Yes, and a single a leaf were the clue, could you but find it, to the treasure house, and, peradventure, to the master too. Beware, O my son, of self-incense. It is the most dangerous on account of its agreeable intoxication. Learn, O my beloved, that the light of Allah's truth will often penetrate an empty head more easily than one too crammed with learning. Tablet the 10th. Capricorn. A deep, black ground o'er which shimmers a phosphorescent light. At each side an aurora borealis rises, mountain-like. Above all, a tiny star. 10. Reflection. Tablet the 10th. Here is revealed the symbol of the messenger of the Most High. The star hovers over the phosphorescent light cast on the darkness as the spirit hovers over the blackness of matter. The aurora borealis stands as the emblem for the magnetic attraction of earth on spirit, the Christ soon to be born in the manger of the goat, the descent of the Holy Ghost into material form, so that heavenly truth may illumine the drear speculum of earthly thought with the divine iridescence of celestial light. It is the lowest arc of the cycle that reveals the new birth of death unto life, the divine egg of Brahma, containing the promise of the new law, peace on earth, goodwill towards men. O child of Adam, be thou the star, and not a dweller of the outer darkness, and let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works. Tablet the 11th. Aquarius. Symbol. A stormy sea is seen. Above it the 8 stars shine, brilliant and clear. 11. Reflection. Tablet the 11th. This tablet symbolizes the complete materialization of man. Man, perfect on the earth and the Lord thereof, in so far as material forces are concerned. The storm is the tempest of life, the whirl of the elements of matter in their battle with the spirit. The 8 stars, brilliant now, for they are the same stars that were dimly seen in Gemini, show that the conquest of matter is complete, the great fall of spirit finished, the end of involution, and this would bring stagnation and death if peace now ensued. The lesson taught is that not in peace and rest can the soul grow, but amidst the earthquakes that shake thrones, the floods that overwhelm countries, the fires that reduce to ashes, has the strong man soul grown to its present state and power. So fear not the storm, but the calm, not the unrest, but the quiet. Fear not the battle, but the ignoble peace of the coward. O child of Adam, the astral soul must learn to do and dare. Not over the brave man's grave shall it be written, "Rest in peace," but I will arise and go to my Father. Tablet the 12th, Pisces. Symbol: a comet beyond it, infinite things only dreamed of as yet, a world floating in an ocean, and in night, beneath are two hands clasped, palm to palm. 12. Tablet the 12th. A revelation of the to be. The comet is the 12th avatar, the herald, coming forth from the starry abyss of the infinite, staying with us a little while, and then flashing on his shiny way to other worlds than ours, bearing the divine word from sun to planet, as the fiery messenger of God. And here the soul may well ask, who, where, whence, and whither? For behold, he has come and gone, and earth could not answer, nor the seas that mourn, inflowing purple of their Lord forlorn, nor rolling heaven with all his signs, revealed and hidden by the sleeve of night and morn. The world, floating in the sea of the infinite and resting in night, shows the present state of humanity. But the blush of dawn is ready to gladden the soul, and the expectant seer, from his lonely vigil on the hilltop, awaits the sunlight which will soon flood the world anew. The two clasped hands point to many problems, chiefly soul, matehood, the message of the starry messenger, universal brotherhood, and the father, motherhood of God. O child of Adam, watch and pray, that a voice of the silence may speak unto you. Here endeth the four quadrants of the tablets of the 12 mansions, wherein are revealed the signs and symbols thereof, as faithfully transcribed from the sacred roll in the astral records, and called the tablets of 8th, April, 1893. Part 2 of the book, which is called the Tablets of 8th of the 10 planetary rulers. Part 2. Here beginneth chapter 1 of the second part of the book, which is called the Tablets of 8th, wherein is transcribed the first trinity of the planetary rulers. The human heart is the true temple of God. Enter ye into your temples, and illumine them with good thoughts. The sacred vessels, they are your hands and your eyes. Do I say that which is agreeable to God, doing good to your neighbors? But first embellish wherein dwells He who gave you life. How small soever your lamp be, never give away the oil which feeds it, but only the light and flame which crown it. Tablet the first, the sun. Symbol: a flaming splendor, a center of light, radiating in all directions. 1. Reflection. Tablet the first, the symbol of all created life, spiritual and material, of all goodness, human or divine, the center of all thought, from brutal instinct to deific wisdom, of all creations, from starry systems to man, and from man back again to invisible gas, of all action, from the imperceptible vibrations of nerve energy to the awful destruction of worlds. All creative potency lies within a sun sphere. Light is life. The planets are but the offspring of light and life. So in this symbol we read the source of the human ego, of our own life. We are, as it were, the planets of the spiritual sun. Our souls are the attributes of the sun, of the spiritual ego. Only from the ego can we receive life eternal and make immortality a fact. Obeying the spiritual life force, the human monad is but an attribute, the symbol of all created life, spiritual and material, of all goodness, human or divine, the center of all thought, from brutal instinct to Deific wisdom, of all creations, from starry systems to man, and from man back again to invisible gas, of all action, from the imperceptible vibrations of nerve energy to the awful destruction of worlds. All creative potency lies within a sun sphere. Light is life. The planets are but the offspring of light and life. So in this symbol, we read the source of the human ego, of our own life. We are, as it were, the planets of the spiritual sun. Our souls are the attributes of the sun, of the spiritual ego. Only from the ego can we receive life eternal and make immortality a fact. Obeying this spiritual life force, the human monad is but an attribute, a reflection of the divine ego, and if it fails to awake to a consciousness of this union, it withers and dies like a flower plucked from the parent tree of life. O child of Adam, in reverence and awe do thou meditate upon this tablet, for it is a thing of beauty, a being of light, life, and love, manifesting its creative mission. It is the vicegerent of God, flaming forth his splendors in the sky. Tablet the second, Mercury, symbol, an elephant kneeling between two square columns, on one an eagle, on the other a vulture. At the side a boy with bow and arrow, standing in doubt which to shoot. Below these a human face, composed of various flowers, whose roots are snakes, a poppy forming an eye which winks. 2. Reflection. Tablet the second. A vision revealing the earthly drama of the microcosm. The elephant represents the highest expression of intelligence, minus the spirit, kneeling between the square columns of matter, i.e., guarded by them. The external mind is sleeping, or, at most, dreaming of the things of the spirit. Above sleeping mind sit the two birds, who represent spirit and matter, each waiting for the slowly preparing feast. The boy, the soul with its weapons, has a choice. Shall it be the sensuality of the flesh that he shall destroy, or the possibilities of the spiritual life on earth? The problem awaits solution. The eagle sits ready to bear aloft the spirit of the sleeper. The vulture hopes for sleep to end in death, that he may live upon the carriage thereof. The flowers of the external mind have for their roots the snakes, and in a larger sense, the flowers of immortality have the serpent of wisdom for their roots. And the poppy winks. It knows its own power of illusion, and the double significance of the snake, the necessity of evil in the evolution of good. It is the tablet of wisdom. O child of Adam, be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Tablet the third, Venus, symbol, an altar, on it two cups, one full, the other spilled. Near them two bleeding hearts, in one a snake, in the other a dagger. Above, clouds, from which comes a woman's face, a wreath in the hand, coming out of the cloud, in the wreath an angel, going upwards with wings outspread. 3. Reflection. Tablet the third. There is but one altar, but one blood of the sacrament in two cups, but one flesh of the Christ, the ego, in two hearts. Two experiences in love, ecstasy, and pain. Two results of experience, the serpent and the dagger, symbolizing wisdom and affliction. Above the altar, the divine woman holds the wreath encircling the angel. The angel of immortal life rises from the altar of sacrifice. Some of the wine is spilled as offering. The cup that is filled is raised to raw.
To serve as the altar of love is the sole mission of all, even as Christ served his disciples. Each soul must find its own service, and then the pilgrims of the sun return to the mansions of the blessed. The great mother god, Venus, Urania, quivers and thrills as she holds forth her offspring, the angel, the young Eros of life eternal. O child of Adam, this is the tablet of love. Meditate thereon, as the last of the triune God. In this tablet lies the secret of suffering and pleasure. He who vibrates in pain will quiver in ecstasy. Only those who have agonized in hell can thrill in heaven. Part 2. Here beginneth chapter 2 of the second part of the book, which is called the Tablets of Aeth, wherein is transcribed the second trinity of the planetary rulers. Thou art called forth to this fair sacrifice. For a draught of milk with the Maruts come hither, O Agni. They who knew the great sky, the Visv, Devas without guile, with those Maruts, come hither, O Agni. They who are brilliant, of awful shape, powerful and devourers of foes, with the Maruts, come hither, O Agni. They who in heaven are enthroned as gods, in the light of the firmament with the Maruts, come hither, O Agni. Let us meditate on the adorable light of the divine rulers. May it guide our intellects. Tablet the fourth, the moon. Symbol, night. A wonderful spider's web. The web glitters in the faint moonlight against a dark background of blue. Moon invisible, on the outside of web a star, in the center a spot of light, underneath a coffin filled with stones. 4. Reflection. Tablet the fourth. The web of life has caused the monad of the soul, and thus incarnated the universe, for each soul incarnates its universe at birth, each one's world being different and peculiar unto himself. At the first breath, the young child polarizes his relations to stars and earth, and it is the affinity and repulsion which make his life experience. And the stars weave the web in their lines of sextile, square, and trine, of opposition and conjunction, thus enveloping the monad in the circle of necessity. Outside the star of the spirit, the ego shines clear, free from the entanglements of the web, and unaffected by the magnetic glamour of the moon. And lo, the coffin is filled with stones, a symbol of death, and the moon, which is but a casket of stones. Therefore, little monad, caught in the tangle of the web of life and the glamour of earthly things, take heart, for beyond all is the star of your being. Call down the law of that star into yourself, and the web is broken and waves its tattered shreds in the breeze. The moonlight, the reflected light, pales as the star sun of your being rises, and the moonlight of earth gives place to the sun spheres of Ra. O child of Adam, the beginning of sorrow is the dawn of spiritual life. The wise man rules the stars, the fools of earth obey. Tablet the fifth, Mars. Symbol, an immense helmet on pedestal, across which a streak of lightning flashes. Beside it a naked child painting pictures on the helmet, beneath a broken sword. 5. Reflection. Tablet the fifth. Can great irony be shown that in this astral symbol, Mars is externally represented as a fierce warrior, awful to behold, the reality, a little child, painting toy pictures on the helmet too big for his curly head. The lesson in this is indeed that the pen is mightier than the sword, that the big and blustering helmet will become a plaything for the child. Soon, that the sword of bloodshed, rape, and ruin will be broken and war relegated to the past, looked at but as pictures painted with hideous reality by the childhood of the race. The symbol also reveals the great executive forces of humanity, the child. The soul can paint, execute its ideas, its hopes, and its fears in any color, the lurid red of blood, the black of ignorance and crime, or in the living light of beauty. All the same, it is the childhood of man painting its ideals in the material world. O child of Adam, curb the anger of Mars, that thy painting may set the dove at liberty. Let the magic of thy soul transform the savage of the desert into the angel of mercy. Tablet the sixth, Jupiter. Symbol: a cave in the mountainside. A face like the Sphinx comes out of the cave. There is a blackness behind it. It looks with upturned head to a light that is way beyond. It is a face that means something awful, a godlike deviance to the things that are. 6. Reflection. Tablet the sixth. Again, we are impressed with the contrast of internal and external things. Jupiter, the symbol of authority, conservatism, church and state, and the stability of human institutions, and the things that are, as the things that are the best. But oh, how widely different the internal, the real Jupiter, that governing power of the spirit that hurls defiance at unjust authority, the cruelty and tyranny of the world. The soul sees the light beyond, and, emerging from the dark chasm of matter, knows the battle that must be fought against wrong. It is the awful, yea, terrible symbol of defiance to gods and men who oppose its onward, upward march to the shining goal of light. Make way, then, make way, for Earth has given birth to her giant son, the spirit. For, listen closely, my friend, to the axiom of immortality. What is soul? Not the spirit, mind you, not the deathless ego, of which you at present perchance know absolutely nothing. Soul is mere memory, a scavenger in earthly states, and a gleaner, a hired help in the fields of heaven. And to become immortal, there must be something more than soul as the result. It must take such a vital interest in its Lord's work that, finally, it becomes too valuable to lose, and must be taken into partnership, so to say. The ego, Lord, has found a valued servant, a trusted steward, after much seeking, and at once adopts it as its very own. And so the soul becomes heir to the heavenly estate, and receives the immortal, vital principle of spiritual union, and awakes from the son of earth, a godlike being, free from the shackles of time, a dweller in eternity. The soul must awake and realize the deific atom around which it revolves before it is too late. Unless this is so, the seed of immortal life, sown in matter by the ego, has not germinated, and it returns unfruitful and dies. It is an abortion. Many seeds never germinate. Many good orthodox but animal-like lives live, move, and die. Yes, die in very truth. Would to God I could make all mankind realize this awful, inconceivable privilege of life, that, Jupiter-like, they would turn and face the light. O child of Adam, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. Part 2. Here beginneth chapter 3 of the second part of the book, which is called The Tablets of Aeth, wherein the third and last Trinity of the planetary rulers is faithfully transcribed. Thou hast entered the immeasurable regions. I am the dweller of the threshold. What wouldst thou with me? Dost thou fear me? Am I not thy beloved? Is it not for me that thou hast rendered up the delights of thy race? Wouldst thou be wise? Mine is the wisdom of the countless ages. Kiss me, my mortal lover. Thus, man pursues his weary calling,
and wrings the hard life from the sky, while happiness unseen is falling down from God's bosom silently. Tablet the 7th. Saturn. Symbol: a human figure with a scepter of power, a being of light crowned with flames. 7. Reflection. Tablet the 7th. In the external, we remember Saturn as an old man, and as a skeleton with a scythe, as time, in fact. But see, O immortal soul, the real Saturn as the angel of life, having from time gathered the experiences which crown him with light, holding the rod of power, the Christ born in the manger of Capricorn, the goat, life born of death, the conqueror of evil. He throws off the mask of age, and divine youth beams on us. He doffs the mantle of rags, and royal splendors clothe him. He lifts the hood, and behold the crown. He raises the crutch, and lo, the rod of power. He drops the scythe of death for the jewel of eternal life. Om Mani Padme O the jewel in the lotus. O child of Adam, meditate on the transmutations of life. Behold the earthly miracle of the caterpillar and the butterfly, of the toiling mortal and the transcendent God. Tablet the 8th. Uranus. Symbol: a human eye from which darts lightning upon an ocean of matter. 8. Reflection. Tablet the 8th. The state of soul and spirit, penetration, the wonderful power of soul perception, which sheds its light on all visible things, receiving their images and interpreting them into the spirit, the all-seer. What does it not convey? The perception that can see deep into your soul and see, as it were, the yet unborn thought that can distinguish the motive of action, that judges the realities of your soul. Such is the astral Uranian. For with us all are three planes of mind: the drift plane, the intellectual, and the spiritual or internal plane, and thought reading can be on one or all of these different states. But only the Uranian seer can read the inmost mind, and so really know the possibilities of your spirit. Imagine an image of soft wax covered with a sensitive skin. All impressions on the skin shape the plastic wax, but go no deeper, do not reach the soul. You can separate these impressions from your real self when calm and alone, and look upon emotion as a surface play. But the tragedies of life strike deep. They affect the soul and go to the center of being. Verbum sap. O child of Adam, watch the tempests of life closely. The ego may sit calm amidst the storm, but if that be stirred, beware. The God acts, the soul alone watches. Tablet the 9th. Neptune. A winged globe. 9. Reflection. Tablet the 9th. An unknown quantity, a hope of progression, ideal love, and all true mental and spiritual ideals, aspiration to become that which we feel to be noble and true, the symbol of the monad, the soul which, receiving its life from the sun, the ego is constantly revealing new forces and potencies of that God life. Each soul's ego is its maker and God. The ego is like the deific potency of the universe, unlimited in potential power, but limited by its monad as to what will be evolved from its awful depth of being. Deity progresses through its expressions of the cosmos. The ego, your God, finds progressive expression through you, through your soul. That soul is not immortal that becomes separated from its ego, its God. So, soul, spread your spiritual wings and soar upward. O child of Adam, know these three things. Eternity is the creator of the universal life. Universal life creates the world, and the world is the creator of time. And of these, the universe is life, and the world is mind, and time is the soul, the sum total of all its experience. And this is individual, conscious life. Jacta est alia, the die is cast, the wings are spread. Tablet the 10th, the cipher, the unknown. Symbol, a shining nebula, within it a dot, aimlessly wandering around an unknown center. 10. Reflection. Tablet the 10th. The unknown, in very truth, it is everything. It is also nothing. Inconceivable visions arise within the mental universe, but nothing assumes definitive form. It is all that is past. It is likewise everything that the future has in store. Amen. O child of Adam, canst thou bring forth Mazaro in his season, or loose the bands of Orion? Part 3 of the book, which is called The Tablets of Aeth, of the 10 great Kabbalistic powers, or angels of the universe. Part 3. Vision. Each angel standing in front of the symbol is dimly outlined and transparent. Through the angel's form is seen its symbol. First, a luminous something which gives the impression of sleep. Second, something moving like an ocean. Third, a storm and lightning. Fourth, a mist. Fifth, an animal moving, resembling a turtle. Sixth, a blue light in the center, a star with 3 points. Seventh, an expanse of water, a blue sky, a shining disk rising on the horizon. Eighth, a lurid sky, like a red dawn. In the water floats an egg. Ninth, 5 stars on a convex arc, like a rainbow. The shell of the egg is broken and forms continents. 10th, a man lying fast asleep under a magnificent palm tree, with his face turned toward the horizon of the sea. Explanation. Only the pure in heart can see God, and to those pure souls I commend the following brief explanation of the vision of the angels of life, which I have here recorded for the benefit of all whom it may now and hereafter concern. In the original vision of the tablets of Aeth, a great circle was seen. In the center, a head, a faint shimmer above the head, as if the light were about to dawn, a dull, lurid glow beneath, as it of chaos or hell. The hair around the head like floating clouds, the beard like strange cloud streaks. Each sign of the zodiac surrounding the center head had within it a faintly seen face. Beginning with the first, it became more and more distinct and perfect with each sign, until it evolved into godlike beauty in Pisces. The symbolic planets were around the zodiac, and beyond these, making a third grand circle, were the 10 evolutionary angels. The vision is that of the evolution of all life, spiritual and material. We gaze at the cosmic sex mystery, and the discerning mind, the loving spirit, can read the correspondence of the great sacred conjugal act of both man and God, of its heights, of its depths, and of all that lie between. To aid in meditation on the bead at the center, herein is written a vision, an experience of the soul in the sleep of Sialam. The hermetic brethren encircled my astral body, which was deeply entranced. From whence, the great question quivered through my inmost being. To answer that awful problem of the soul, the released spirit went on its fearsome journey back through star systems, back beyond all stars, back to the blackness of nothing, that awful nothing, whose outside with fearful flames, the fiery cherubim winged, taking all possible shapes and unformed living shapes. A human flamed and changed and vanished. The tornado of whirling, flashing, chaotic life swirled and drove through the darkness of chaos, of nothing from nothing, and that great unknown abyss is God, but the life is evolutionary. Deity is progressive, so never can man cease to be. Never can he return to that awful center of nothingness, or be absorbed within the bosom of the unmanifested being. On and on and on with deific power, God moves in ever-increasing whirls of evolution. Thus came the answer of the ages. From primeval force, from the mighty breath of unmanifested being, through every phase of action and reaction, from the energies of storm and lightning, from star dust to sunlight, has come the spirit of man. And the astral brethren understood. The two seals of the earth: one, symbol, a human being with a flaming, burning heart; two, symbol, a round disk inside a light as from a sun, conceived but not seen. So here endeth the book which is called the Tablets of Aeth, transcribed from the astral origins in the year of doom. MDCCCXC 111. Omnia vincit veritas. Thy kingdom come. Zinoni, April, 1893. End of section 13. Recording by Jill Preston. Section 14 of The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Preston. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2, by Thomas Burgone. Chapter 13, Penetralia, the Secret of the Soul. We have now arrived at our final study, which we have approached step by step, amid the labyrinth of the mysteries concealed beneath the veil of Isis. We stand at last upon the very threshold of the sacred adytum, the Holy of Holies, from whence proceeds our final revelation of that inmost conception of man's identity with his Creator, the penetralia of his being, the last secret of the incarnated soul. The written word almost fails us, does fail in fact, when we come to the difficult task of externalizing ideas, the sublimity of which is so infinitely beyond the crystallized images of matter that they can only be realized in their true glory when the purified soul can view them from the ineffable heights of eternal spirit. We are lost, dazed, at the brilliancy of the spiritual imagery that opens out before us in its fathomless stretch of the eternities that are past, of the ever imperishable present, and the unborn eternities yet to be, all of them linked together in one grand chain of spiritual relationship and deathless identity, as man, the angel, God, and God the angel, man as the triune cycle of being within the incomprehensible cycle of necessity, which constitutes nature's cosmic university for the complete graduation, education, and purification of that self-conscious, deific atom of life, whose expression becomes the human soul. Ah, my brothers, could you, but for one single instant, realize who you are, where you are journeying, and what your final destiny, every earthly moment at your disposal would be rightly used, and every hour considered too short for your efforts to aid your fellow man. Selfishness, wealth, and power would be so utterly contemptible in your sight that their possession would be considered a fearful affliction and a curse, the moment they exceeded the comfortable requirements of mundane existence. Leave self and the world behind you for the present, and, for the moment, leave your life, with its manifold vanities, in the outer court, and together let us cross the threshold and enter the door of the temple. There, at last, we have entered the sacred sanctuary, my brother, and we stand face to face with the imperishable truth of our being, the truth which makes us free, the truth which must ultimately prevail by virtue of its own inherent divinity. And we realize man as he really is, not as he outwardly seems to be. We view him as a molecule, composed of a congregation of separate atoms, all of them held in their places by the centripetal force of the central human atom of life. And yet, small as he is, small as his kingdom is, compared with the mighty creation of which he is a part, he possesses all the inherent qualities of the whole. This, then, is our first conception. Man is a microcosmic molecule, an atom of divine life. The scene changes within the chamber, and upon the shimmering, luminous veil yet before us we view the large and mighty planet called the Earth, not as a revolving satellite of the Sun, but as she really is, a vital organ of the macrocosm, the stellar womb of the solar system, the matrix which produces the material organic form of humanity. When the Earth was without form and void, as we are informed in the mystical language of Genesis, the human soul had not yet reached the state or grade in the celestial university that desired the Earth and its temporary illusions. Hence this state was void, an unborn idea, the to be, and darkness, symbolical of complete lack of life and intelligence, was upon the face of the deep, silent space. Again the scene changes, and one by one the numberless planets, planetoids, moons, meteors, comets, and other attendant bodies pass before the eye of the soul as we gaze upon the curtain of this sacred penetralia, each orb belonging to some portion of the astral man, each great planet constituting some vital function of the macrocosmic organism, and conferring those qualities upon each and every single atom pertaining to that degree of life, so that the solar system becomes individualized as a grand cosmic organism, its attendant satellites constituting its vital organs, and the shining zodiac its outward form. So also each planet is a living, cosmic individual, intensely alive, living, moving, breathing, and bringing forth its offspring of like substance matter, in obedience to the potential demand of incarnating spirit. The sun is alive, glowing with life, and constitutes the heart and arterial center of all the circulating fluids of the stellar anatomy. Scientists may continue to predict, as they have been predicting, the day when solar radiation will cease, but their predictions will prove as worthless as the sighing of the summer wind, so far as reality is concerned. It is an incomprehensible mystery to science, says Sir Robert Ball in his Story of the Heavens, how the sun has been able to maintain its heat with such regularity in the past, for there has been no appreciable change in the earth's temperatures for thousands of years. What it is today, it was 10,000 years ago. Yea, Sir Robert Ball, and will be in 10,000 years to come. You may wonder, and the Royal College may wonder, but in the meantime, the mighty, pulsating sun continues beating out its rhythmic vibrations of spiritual and dynamic life, continues, and will continue, to send the exhilarating current throughout every atom to the remotest part of his solar dominions, and the same current returns to him again, undiminished, for the purification which his glowing, transmuting photosphere alone can give, to be sent forward again upon its mission of light, life, and love around the vital organic worlds of the astral organism. There is nothing lost, no radiation of energy dispersed upon the uniformed, lifeless ether. From the radiating solar focus of divinity, it comes, and to him, undiminished, it returns, and so on forever and ever, until the last Deific atom has won its laggard way back to the shining throne of God. The sun breathes, the pulsating process of dynamic respiration, eternally repeated during the grand period of a solar lifetime, renews its vital energies and supplies itself with the full abundance of the ever-living spirit, transmitted from the shoreless ether in which it lives. It needs no other food except the magnetic nutriment it receives from each vital organ or planet, in return for the electrical life current it transmits to them. Just as the human lungs inflate themselves with the vital atmosphere, which is only the ether, dynamically diluted by the earth to harmonize with our conditions, to oxygenate the blood and add fresh fuel to the physical furnace, or supply finer essences to the nervous centers. Just as the human heart, with its continual rhythmic pulsations, propels forth the circulating fluid to every part of the human frame, so does the central heart and lungs of the grander man of the skies, the sun, send forth its vitalizing energy to every part of the universe. Such are the crowding thoughts, born of interior knowledge, that flood the mind as we view these sacred revelations within the sacred chamber of the soul. As yet, we are gazing upon the undulating flow of the astral light. We yearn within our utmost being to become the center of the penetralia, and gaze upon the glorious radiance of the Odani, from whose ineffable presence we are only screened by the last shining veil of semi-transparent matter that waves and trembles with every spiritual aspiration. The soul sends forth its pleading cry for light. Who and what is God? Faintly, as the distant vesper sounds upon the cooling eve, comes the answer. Who and what art thou? What canst thou see? What delectable blessing does nature vouchsafe to the pure in heart? We tremble with the awful, yet thrilling revelation. We know dimly, yet fail to realize in our outward consciousness the full import thereof. We realize wherein the mistaken selfhood hath become the only begotten of the Father, but the revelation is too much and too little. We know that, faint as the voice seemed to the yet unprepared soul, an echo only, it was the voice of the Adonai behind the veil. And now we crave the knowledge of the where and whither. Again, we see the Earth as the vital function of the interplanetary being. It is composed of substance termed matter, which substance is the aggregation of countless atoms, which science has not, and never can, resolve into their individual selves. These atoms are rings of the atomless ether, which, thus, differentiated from the formless ether, become centers of force, the center of such force being a vacuum within the atomic ring, a center so small that a microscope with lens 1,000 times as powerful as the most perfect modern instrument would fail to reveal it. These atoms form systems under the control of another apparent vacuum, or, rather, this vacuum seems to be the focus or center about which they revolve. This system constitutes a scientific molecule of matter, and, in response to the innumerable vibrations, they assume different forms or dimensions and become indifferently molecules of oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, or carbon, as the case may be, all of which are but different modes of motion of the same primitive atoms, there being in nature but three things: ether, intelligence, and motion. What ether is, no one knows. We call it the formless spirit, the unmanifest, etc. But there can be no doubt but that motion is the product of intelligence, since we never see motion but as the manifestation of evolution, and this is the expression of mind. Therefore, we have a duality, ether and intelligence, one the living spirit, the other the eternal substance for its manifestation. Every molecule of matter is the outward form, the center of which is the incarnating spirit in some degree of progress. Man's physical organism is a system of life and development for countless billions of them. So the Earth, in its functional expression as the womb of nature for the outward expression of man, is only so in a material sense. He is prior to the planet. He, man, is only the offspring of the planet by virtue of his material body being a part of the substance of the Earth. This life is a stage only of his material journey, and just as man's body is continually throwing off useless dead matter and replacing the same with new life, so, too, the countless organic forms of Earth are hourly returning to the ground from which they sprang, and new forms, rising from the same dust, are taking their places. Here, then, is the sum total. First is revealed to us the grand astral man, the zodiac being the outward idea or form, the sun and his system the vital functions thereof. The Earth, apart from its functional expression or place, is also an individual. Man, apart from forming a molecule of the planetary womb, by comparison, is also an individual. And, lastly, every molecule of man's organism is also, in reality, an individual, and small only by comparison with the human frame. And as there are the high solar archangels of the sun, and a chief amongst these seated upon his throne of fire, so there is an archangelic chief of the Earth, surrounded by descending degrees of wisdom and power to man, who also, in his turn, stands as the deific center and chief of his being, his soul being the sphere of consciousness, which, when united to the feminine soul, constitutes the angel of life eternal. Down still we go, and find that this divine scale of life and being is, from the lowly molecule, system upon system, climbing, sphere upon sphere, upward and onward, forever, evermore, and all eternity cannot bring nearer the end of man's glorious immortality. In the full revelation of this divine scheme of creation, so full of light, life, love, joy, and harmony, a scheme void of death and annihilation, the mind once more reflects upon the physical illusions of slowly advancing scientific thought. Camille Flammarion, the great psychomaterialist of France, has painted in his various novels a lurid, almost horrible, picture of what the mighty universe must become from the logical deductions of his own school of thought, a school which would be best named as transcendental materialism. According to this conception, thousands, aye, millions of worlds are rushing through space, inert, frozen, and dead. Suns have cooled down and ceased to give forth the life-sustaining element of light, but have still retained their mighty attraction upon their attendant planets, according to the laws of gravity, by virtue of their material mass, and thus hold their planetary offspring in the eternal, cold, icy grasp of death. Our sun, too, is cooling fast. The Earth has already lost a great portion of her own internal heat. She has passed her prime of life, and death, cold, icy death, has already begun to encroach upon her extremities. The South Pole, the feet, is now practically lifeless in one perpetual covering of ice. So, too, her head, her locks are the white of perpetual snow. No longer has she the blush and beauty of youth. No longer adorned with the healthy covering of verdure, which youthfulness gives, and, as our geologists prove, was once the case. So that, although the time may still be long, according to our reckoning of years, it is only a brief moment in eternity when this fair earth, and also the beauteous splendor of the silent stars, will be locked forever in darkness and the final sleep of doom. If this be so, we ask of the inmost soul, if life be but the fitful awakenings of the indestructible spirit, ebbing and flowing in response to the rise and fall of nature's cosmic barometer and the transmutations of matter, if life is, in reality, but a brief and passing moment, eternally repeated, from the flush of youth, the gilded salon, to the bier and the shroud, then why, oh why should the spirit of mortal be proud? Why aspire to penetrate the inward realities of life and enter the Holy of Holies to seek and find out God? As the rushing torrent of this thought swept o'er the mental chambers of the soul, and saturated the spirit with its icy sting, as it lay still chained within the prison house of matter, the higher self rose, sublime in its grandeur and consciousness of divine relationship. Oh, why should the spirit of mortal be proud? Why aspire to penetrate the inward realities of life and enter the Holy of Holies to seek and find out God? As the rushing torrent of this thought swept o'er the mental chambers of the soul, and saturated the spirit with its icy sting, as it lay still chained within the prison house of matter, the higher self rose, sublime in its grandeur and consciousness of divine relationship, and, in the last earthly appeal for light, for divine truth, as to man and his immortality, it turned in reverence and awe before the still, shimmering veil of the sacred penetralia. The trial had come, the crucial test, whether of life or death, the final revelation to man. In purity of heart and humility of soul, we await in agonizing suspense. There is a thrilling sensation, as though of 10,000 electric currents consuming the frame, and a swaying to and fro, as if drifting upon an ocean of fire. Then a dead silence, so profound that whole eternity seemed to pass, without either beginning or end. And the sight of the inward spirit is opened slowly. Who? Where? What? For the shadows have fled. The luminous curtain fades, is gone, and flashing before the inward sight stands the ineffable Adonai. It is I, you. There is no God but this, and in one moment the interior consciousness becomes at one with self, God, and from that inconceivable height of profound vision we again look upon nature. Behold, sun, moon, and planets in all the original magnificence of their nebulous luminosity. From nebulous rings we proceed, stage after stage, each producing its own degrees of life. On we pass the ages, the geological cycles of inconceivable duration in time, but only a mere instant in eternity, and on as the changes roll, until we see Earth as she is now, still on, as the ever-urging desire of the triumphant soul, and a remarkable change is apparent. From forces at present latent, there comes a change, and instead of so-called physical electrical races, have superseded the present humanity. Crystallization has ceased, and all things become lighter in density and more ethereal in nature. And the orbit of the earth grows less. Nearer and nearer shines the mighty sun. First Vulcan, then the swift messenger of the gods are indrawn within the solar vortex, each absorption producing a cataclysmic change upon our earth. Then comes the turn of Venus, while slowly and surely the orbit of the earth contracts and nearer shines the sun. And finally the beautiful earth, her mission over, the last atom of life beyond her rule, inward she sweeps and is lost in the mighty ocean of fire as a stone is lost in the lake. Verily is the word of prophecy a literal truth. The earth shall be destroyed with fire, and so on with the rest, each planet in its proper turn fulfilling the functions at present performed by the earth, each becoming the grand theater of material and ethereal life, and the cometary bodies today chasing unknown orbits in the realms of ether gradually fall into line when their erratic cycle is ended, taking the places of the present outermost planets. No such thing as death, no such thing as the dark silence of eternal night for any organic creation of the Most High. From the sun they come, and unto the sun each must ultimately return. even as the body of man, coming from the dust of earth, must also return thereto, to be taken up in new forms and furnish substance for other degrees of life. And thus will it be until the sun, in its mighty solar heavens of purified spiritual life, will form the last, the final battleground of matter, receiving its new life from a greater center than itself. A glorious solar world, well typified in the last battle of the gods, and the new earth, a world whereon the angels tread, in superlatively beautiful forms, clothed with the ideals and emanations of their own divine purity, souls clothed in air, treading the ethereal realms of light as the children of God and the inheritors of the kingdom of heaven. Must the searching eye of the soul seek further? Must the insatiable thirst of the spirit launch out upon the trackless infinities of the yet to be? Must it still penetrate further in the profound beyond, where time ceases to be, where the past, present, and the future are forever unknown, but exist only as the definite consciousness of the eternal now? No. The soul at last rests satisfied. The final revelation is over. My brother, we have done, and, in closing, have only to add that, not until the speculating philosophy of earthly schools blend with the science of the spheres in the full and perfect fruition of the wisdom of the ages, will man know and reverence his Creator, and, in the silent penetrality